Pew pew.
Quick step, remember to face in the direction of your targets first before
I'll probably play Elden Ring, yeah. Definitely.
activating bullet rain, since you won't be able to change directions afterwards. The best tripods to pick include Vital Point Shot, Rapid Fire, and Flame Shot. Vital Point Shot and Flame Shot significantly enhance your crit rate and crit damage, while Rapid Fire increases bullet rain's duration from 2 seconds to 3 seconds and boosts its damage. If you're up against challenging monsters, you may want to swap Rapid Fire for Range Shot to raise your damage against them in addition to widening the skill's AoE radius. The following pistol skills are exclusively applicable to the Time of Hunt playstyle due to the firepower they provide. These are necessary to compensate for the gunslinger's inability to use any of the shotgun skills when choosing this playstyle. Meteor Stream summons a barrage of bullets into the air and crashes them into the ground to deal explosive damage against enemies within the AoE. Meteor Stream is a good initiator skill against unaware and slow-moving targets, given that it takes a couple of seconds for the bullets to crash into them. However, avoid
Ja, det jsme zkoušeli, ale jsem to tam docela slušné.
Raz, dva. Jak na jaký výstupy? No, tak proč se ten projekt vypínal včera? Jako já to nechápu. Nemusí. Ne, tohle je v pohodě, tohle já bych se s nima vyřešila. Slyší mě nebo ne? Teda zkusí Zoom. Raz, dva, tři.
everyone. Thank you for coming. Sorry for the slight delay and some technical issues. I'm really pleased to welcome you here. This actually is more of a symbolic event for us because it somehow pushes the activities that we gathered around the 3D laboratory here at the Academy of Fine Arts onto another level. This should be like an annual conference titled Beyond the Gaming Principle. Maybe we'll get to some psychoanalytical roots today during those contributions. And just for cursory information, we as organizers are somehow gathered around the FRAC collective, which is based here at the 3D laboratory at AVU, and from, let's say, various activities and maybe some plans for the future, we may somehow, speculate that, the boldest plans are actually to have a new major here at the Academy concerned with 3D technologies, gaming cultures, vernacular ontologies, world building, environmental design, etc. So these are the horizons where we actually operate. You can follow us and our various activities further, and I hope we'll maybe gather next year at this same conference. That may be enough for my part, and Philip will introduce our first keynote speaker.
Okay. Hello. I'm happy to introduce Alfie Baum, who is a distinguished game theorist and author of Enjoying It, Capitalism, and and PlayStation Reward. So, let's go for it. This one is working.
Shall I use that?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay then.
Shall I use that thing? What do I do to do that? I mean, I don't have to, but I did have a thing that I gave to Andre's folder. I don't know if it's here. It is online, yeah. I think he'll know how to get it, actually.
Okay.
I don't actually need it, but
Okay.
I mean, I don't need it, but do you want to get it up, Andre, so that I can show the slides that I uploaded to your thing? Okay, yeah, that's what you should do, yeah, I think. Because it's right there, you might as well. Okay. Hi. Dot what? Dot what? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, hang on, I don't know how to. This keyboard is different. Keyboard, not my normal keyboard. You better do it. This is a different
Yes.
set of keys.
No, sir, obviously. If it's the middle of lecture, we should be good.
Yeah, that's good. All right.
Okay.
I mean, that was worth doing since it was so quick. Okay, great. First of all, yeah, let me just say thanks so much for inviting me and everyone. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for coming as well. All right, I need to stay close to this, I think. Sorry, I move around a lot. Yeah, I'll talk for about 30 or 40 minutes and then really looking forward to hearing the rest of the papers and discussing things and playing League of Legends and that sort of thing this afternoon, this evening. So, I mean, I wanted to talk about, I suppose, what I've been researching. Is that the word? I'm not really a researcher, actually. What I've been thinking about the last sort of 3 or 4 years since I wrote this book, The PlayStation Dream World, which these guys have been nice enough to read. But basically, so this kind of starts with video games, I suppose, and then, but also kind of grows into something else. And what I'm mostly interested in is the relationship between politics and desire, and I guess we could say the digital or digital media. And this is why I've always used psychoanalysis as my sort of main, along with some kinds of Marxism, but for the most part, psychoanalysis as a way of understanding how video games function and as a way of understanding how digital life functions. To some people this is a strange approach because obviously the principal theories of psychoanalysis come from before the age of the internet. But in a sense, the way that the internet and the way that games and the way that digital and social media move us is at the level of desire, at the level of libidinal economy, emotions, drives, affects, and so on. So for me, psychoanalysis is the way to understand how our desires are being transformed in the age of video games, let's say, or the age of the internet. I'm thinking of this from Jean-Francois Lyotard, who wrote about in the 80s of a desire revolution. He felt that there was a revolution in people's desires underway. And my position is that really now is this moment of desire revolution. Our desires are being transformed and changed, and we're becoming new subjects, completely new kind of subjects. And so psychoanalysis also needs to change to account for the new subjects that we're becoming, and that this is a critical moment, really, in my view, in which desire is being transformed, and what it means to be a desiring subject is being transformed. And I think that video games, along with other forms of online media and digital media and internet media, video games play a really critical role, and gamification as well, a really critical role in transforming these desires and sort of setting the desires of the future, deciding what the desires of the future will be and what the subject of the future is. So what I wanted to think about in this talk is whether this desire revolution is to think about its politics and who is it serving. And as somebody, I think the first thing to say is that, and as we'll discuss, it serves a massively corporate agenda. So lots of the ways in which our desire is being transformed in the present moment is in the service of contemporary capitalism. And then maybe a second category, which is being served by this desire revolution, is perhaps what was a couple of years ago referred to as the alt-right or the far-right. We can see communities on certain gaming communities and also certain image board communities around 4chan, 8chan and so on, trying to gamify desire in different ways and sort of take control or take some kind of activist control of this desire revolution to serve the political rights. And my position is that the left, which I consider myself to be a part of, or at least I did until 2019 when I sort of lost any hope that there was a left, I think the left is really lagging behind, let's say, in this kind of taking advantage, in battling this war over the future of desire. And the left often tends to decide to not participate in this desire revolution that we are in the middle of. And if it does that, the right and the capitalists will. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about in this talk, the question of desire, the question of its politics, and the question of what we can do in this contemporary situation. Okay, but I first wanted to rather sort of archaically start with this quotation from Roland Barthes. Not a theorist who I often use, but this quotation I absolutely love from his book, A Lover's Discourse, not often studied as much as some other of his things. And I think it's extremely important to understand desire and the way desire functions in contemporary capitalism. And it says this: "The first thing we love is a scene, for love at first sight requires the very sign of its suddenness. What makes me irresponsible, subject to fatality, swept away, ravished. And of all the arrangement of objects, it is the scene which seems to be seen best for the first time. A curtain parts, I am initiated. The scene consecrates the object I'm going to love." Barthes is talking about something here that we could call love or desire, but it's really about a moment of, he uses this word ravished, he also uses the word ravishment, and he also uses the word enamoration, meaning the moment in which I become enamored with something. And for Barthes, this is extremely interesting in my opinion because, and in some way psychoanalytic, because he's saying that the most important thing is when you feel this desire, when you're a subject and you feel desire, desire appears to you for the first time, and suddenly you see something and you want it. Now that could be a lover, I don't know, a bowl of noodles, Pokemon, or whatever it might be. But it's the moment of desire where you suddenly sort of feel it for the first time. And he points out here that the most important thing is not the relationship between the subject and the object, but the relationship between the scene in which this takes place. Right? He is using this language of drama, right? A curtain parts, as in, like, you know, you're watching a play. There is actually a scene laid out in front of you, actors in different places, props in different places. And the scene has objects, and at some point you're watching this scene, you're facing it, and desire for the object becomes possible. But it's not a connection between you and the object. It's more important how this scene is prepared. So in a sense, I think we need to simply replace the word scene in this quotation with the word screen if we want to understand how contemporary digital desire works. And we can think immediately of so many examples of that. You know, when you're, let me give three. If you're on something like Tinder or Grindr or one of the more interesting dating apps, which we'll talk about in a minute, you know, it's very important how this kind of gamification works. You're flipping the cards, and it is the preparation of the app that makes desire possible. It's not that you suddenly see a picture of somebody or some sort of profile and you think, okay, this is the relationship between subject and object is important. It's not important at all. It's much more the relationship between you and the program, the screen that you're facing, the scene that has been prepared by the corporations who make these products. Right? It's exactly the same with Pokemon Go, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. You know, the Pokemon appears on the screen, and you don't really need that Pikachu, but because of the way it's appeared, it appears desirable. And you could perhaps even argue that something like Deliveroo, I don't know what your delivery companies, food delivery companies are like in the Czech Republic, but one could even see that screen with the different food options and the ratings of different restaurants and one or two images as a kind of scene of desire where you scroll through, and then it's not that you really need that pizza, but the pizza sort of jumps out in this kind of arrangement of objects, and then you pursue this desire through the screen in this kind of way, which is clearly serving a particular corporate kind of agenda, but we'll come to that later. Let's look at some examples of scenes of desire. I already mentioned this, and okay, so just very quickly, I mean, I've been talking about Pokemon Go since this last book. I'm still talking about it. I'm still playing it, and it's awful. I mean, but in some ways, it helps to embody the first part of this argument, which is a very simple point, that, you know, the way in which we, and this, I'll tell one quick story about this, which I've told a few times, but I think it's worth saying again. So Pokemon Go, it's about driving people around the city. If you want to understand the smart city, you can't do better than look at something like Pokemon Go, and the way that the smart city is about desire. And this is another thing I really wanted to explore in my recent work, that the city functions by this kind of reorganization of desire. And so what Pokemon did, when I was first playing this in 2016 when it came out, what Franco Bifo Berardi called the summer of Pokemon Go. In Hong Kong I was living at the time, and there was a lot of poker stops at McDonald's, and they had an advertising deal with McDonald's, which meant that, you know, for every one Big Mac sold or whatever, Google had bought out Niantic, the company at the time. They've now sold it. You know, there was an advertising deal between McDonald's and Google and the Pokemon company. So what is happening here is people are being driven to McDonald's by this app. Really simple point. In the most the rarest Pokemon in 2016 in Hong Kong was the Porygon. It's common now. And you could only get it in the most expensive shopping mall in Hong Kong. Right, so this is also Google is sort of planning this kind of beta testing, really. How can we move people around the city in a way which suits us? And the most interesting thing that happened to me, actually, in 5 years in China, is I was giving a talk once in a place exactly like this, where I was saying how evil Tencent was, the company who runs WeChat. And at the end of this talk, some people came up to me and said, "Oh, we're from Alibaba." And I thought, shit, lawyers, something like that, I'm going to get in trouble. And they said, no, you hate Tencent. And I was like, yeah. And then they were like, oh, so you must love us. And I thought, what? no, you're both evil, you know. And then, but turns out there is a history of this because Alibaba, you know, Jack Ma's company, is from Hangzhou, where I was. And so there is this really weird local love for Alibaba because of its impact on the area. So it's common actually to be a fan of Alibaba but an enemy of Tencent, which kind of blew my mind. But anyway, these guys said, why don't you come with us to Cloud Town, which is the kind of Silicon Valley of Alibaba. I said, amazing, I would love to. And they took me there and they showed me the most incredible stuff, all the latest technology. Hangzhou is incredible because it's one of the oldest cities in China, but it's also this prototype smart city. So they're trialing lots of different technologies. Traffic lights which know how old you are based on the wrinkles around your face and then stay green for longer if you're older and so on. You know, various kind of drone delivery systems, whatever. It's fascinating. Anyway, I said to the guy, what is the he showed me this car. It's made by Rover, that I think is a German car manufacturer, and in collaboration with Alibaba. And they were saying about this car, this is the best thing. He was incredibly happy about this car. And I said, well, what's the most important thing about this car? And I was expecting him to say it's fast, it's safe, it drives itself, whatever. But he said, it knows when you're hungry and what you might want to eat before you know. Right? And at first I thought, oh, this is rubbish. And I didn't think about it for some time. And then I realized this is the most important thing about the car. And I asked the guy why this matters. And he said, well, you know, on Tuesday afternoon, you might fancy sushi at 4:30, but you don't know that you fancy sushi at 4:30, but the car knows. And then the car says, why don't we go to this restaurant here and get the sushi that you desire? And I said, why do you want to give that to people? And they said, because we want people to stop using cash and only use Alipay. So we're redirecting people to restaurants which take Alipay instead of WeChat Pay or cash. So this is exactly how desire, you know, Pokemon Go is one example, this car is another example. It's how the city of the future is based on a reorganization of desire which has a particular kind of corporate agenda or corporate reason why that happens. This part is simple, I think, and don't need to prove the point anymore, it's obvious. More complex, I suppose, is this. Hopefully you haven't visited this fine website, trump.dating. But what we start to see is a kind of politicization of these scenes of desire. You know, when we visit trump.dating, we don't... the scene is incredibly important, and it's now being manipulated not just for corporate reasons, but for sort of a political reason, so that desire only becomes possible, and I want to say more about this, what we could call cyber balkanization, or splinternet, or filter bubble, the way in which desire is being organized into bubbles, right, so that we're separated from each other's desire, and there are these kind of like pockets of desire, rather than like a communal or communist desire. But I'll do that at the end, I think, when I look at the Mackenzie Walk thing. But here with Trump.dating, you're certainly seeing, and there is a history of this on the right, so it's important to say that this is not the only right-wing dating site in America. It's not even the only Trump dating site in America. So, and there's also the Atlasosphere. I'm sure some of you have heard of that, the Ayn Rand dating site. You know, and there are some also... there are lots which are ironic. One of the things that's funny about researching this is it's incredibly difficult to tell which ones are real. So you have to actually use them to check. Because some I was writing, oh my God, this dating site exists, and then someone told me, that's a spoof. And I was like, oh, actually, yeah, that is a spoof. But anyway, these ones are real. And so you're seeing this, and there's a real history of this on the right. I mean, and I think it should also be connected to the gamification of politics and the relationship between desire, games, and politics. And for example, things like SMV, sexual market value, which I'll talk to again, which is a common thread on Chan boards like 8chan, where you know, there's a kind of point-scoring system which is developed by the communities, and it's completely embedded within, you know, misogynistic and homophobic discourse. But there is a sort of deeper history. This is kind of, Trump.dating is kind of like the surface of a quite a complicated attempt on parts of the online right to start to sort of manipulate desire and think about the future of desire in terms which will be beneficial for their agendas, right? Which the left have tried to do. For example, Red Yenta, dating site for, you know, people like me, I guess. And it's you know, these attempts are there. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this idea of how this desire gets kind of politicized. But first of all, look at some other kind of examples of these, like the question of scenes of desire and politicization of desire and transformation of desire in contemporary culture. So video games, like, I think, play a key kind of historical role in this, especially dating simulators, you know, which actually has an incredibly interesting history. They come from the 80s. Initially, they were mostly made with the intention that girls would play them. So there are these two traditions of dating simulators. There's the male tradition, let's call it, which is really probably best embodied by this awful game Super Seducer from 2018. There's now Super Seducer 2. And if you can't read that little quote there at the bottom, it says, "Brush her hair back and tell her she has cute little ears." So this is a kind of pick-up artistry simulator. So the concept is that it teaches men how to pick up women. And that's, I guess, a counterpart to this list on the other side of the screen there, which is a long history of mostly mobile dating simulators running up to Episodes, which is still one of the most popular downloadable apps in the App Store and in the Play Store now. So, I mean, Girl Garden is probably the furthest I could find back, and I found it worth mentioning because it's a mixture of a dating simulator and flower arranging. So you have to grow flowers, and if you grow nice enough flowers and put them together in a nice enough bunch, you get a husband. And if you don't, the boy marries someone else who's better at putting flowers together than you. But even from the deeper roots of the Japanese genre of dating simulators, there is politics to it, of course, and it's interesting, for example, to me, how much marriage appears in farming simulators and how the nostalgia for farming simulators from Harvest Moon through Stardew Valley or whatever tends to end with this kind of marriage narrative and so on. So I would also add farming simulators as a kind of weird offshoot of the dating simulator and so on. But what I really want to talk about is the way in which a particular kind of patriarchal politics, masculine politics, and perhaps even right-wing politics comes into this thing. So, and the reference point for this is a horrible book called The Game, I think from 2007. It was really famous in the UK, and I think it's this American journalist who he tried to infiltrate. I mean, pick-up artistry on YouTube is a huge thing. It's absolutely bizarre, this whole discourse. And this journalist tried to infiltrate these communities and eventually became one of them and wrote this book for university campus men to follow, like a set of rules to follow for how to sort of pick up women. And it was extremely gamified. You know, it was really, it was a textbook and almost, you know, written in prose, but thinking of the process of picking up women as much like a game, and obviously presenting a very particular kind of sense of what this is. Now, we see that sort of disappear from university campuses. Obviously, it would be extremely unwoke to be playing the game on university campuses today. I'm sure you'd be thrown out, quite rightly. But what seems to have happened is this has kind of migrated into this digital community. And there's one even more concerning example than this. If you have not played Summer Lesson, don't. It's virtual reality is a couple of years older even it's a Japanese, but it's now in English. I mean, this is just, you won't believe. I mean, it's completely shameless. You put the headset on, you have to use your head like this, and they're like, the story is that you're like a teacher of English, and you teach all these young Western and Japanese women who refer to you as sensei, and then, you know, you have to use your head, and their like bodies are there wearing hardly any clothes, and to activate the game's mechanism, you have to sort of use your head like this. Very strange. You've got the two PlayStation controllers like this, and you have to do things like stroking their hair, whatever. Then, as you can see, she sort of feeds you cake and says, "Is it good, sir?" And you just sort of, you know, you have to engage with your voice. It's extremely strange, and, you know, I haven't gone into it so much in this, but this is really the soft edge of the virtual reality porn industry, which is humongous. You know, it's the number one form of virtual reality that exists today. And in virtual reality porn, I mean, it's really, I mean, this is a bit of a digression, but just quickly worth saying that, you know, you would need psychoanalysis to understand it, because literally in some of these, there are two kinds of VR porn, right? One of them, you're just in the room, right? So you're just like a camera and you're in the room. And this is like just a 360 camera, and you put the headset on and suddenly you're there. So something's happening in the room, some sex is happening, whatever, and you're just this kind of weird, godlike viewer who's transported into the room. The other kind, it's like I guess in porn terms, POV, you put the headset on and there's someone else's body there. It's literally someone else's penis. And so you're like transported into this other man's body, and then the pornography kind of happens around you. Exactly the same monocular gaze that comes from a video game like this. And this is extremely interesting because it turns the digital into a way of sharing empathies between men. So you literally put on a headset and enter this world where you are another man. So, I mean, I suppose you could think about that as homosocial, but quite literally, you are substituting. I mean, so one could think about that in terms of castration, but also I think the main thing for me is to show that there are these communities, there's this entire, and the technology itself is lending itself to a particular kind of sharing of an experience between men, I suppose, and between men with a very very particular kind of, well, I mean, misogynistic, patriarchal, sure, but also politically inflected. And so I think there's a connection between this and this, is what I'm saying. I think the gamification of desire, which you can clearly see in examples like Super Seducer and Summer Lesson, is connected to a particular vision of the world and vision of desire, which is serving a particular political agenda as well. Okay, yeah, another one of my favorite examples of this transformation of desire is Replica. I don't know if people have noticed this. If you're on Twitter, it's currently a sponsored ad on Twitter, but I've actually been playing this since 2017. So it's exploding again. I think it's timely to discuss this right now because Twitter seems really interested in this. What this is, it's unbelievable. It's basically a chatbot. This was much more. I had a virtual reality girlfriend for a while. This one is just on your phone. I guess you can call it now, but it's basically just a chatbot. This one was much more of a problem, in my opinion, than the VR one. And really, it's incredible in terms of data as well. There's a lot to say about this. I'll just quickly go through it. It basically functions by reading the history. Initially, it was going to read the history of all your text messages, right, and all your interactions between friends and lovers or whatever, which have taken place in WhatsApp or in a text format. And then it learns, the AI learns to become you, or to become, so by reading all your history of messaging, it works out what you like and what you like to be told, and gives it to you, right? So it literally replaces a kind of, and you can make it a friend, you can make it a lover, you can make it whatever you want. But really it sort of learns to become a version of you, a kind of strange reflection of you. Obviously there were some data implications, they were criticized for that, and now it functions by collecting data itself. So it starts very stupid. It says to you, like, good morning, how are you? Do you like pizza? Standard things. But then after you talk for a long, long time, now it can ask me about my daughter, what am I doing today? It probably knows I'm doing this talk and can say something about that. So after you feed it and feed it and feed it and feed it and feed it, it basically harvests all your data. Another talk would be about that. But for the important thing here is how this functions to give you what you want, but also transform what you want, right? And set a new tone for what a connection, what a relationship is. And the platform here is really important. And again, I think this, more than anything, proves this is valid today in a quite unprecedented way. Because here, we spoke about the relationship between subject and object and how the screen is actually more important than the object. But here, there is no object. You just have the screen, and it functions perfectly fine. Yeah. Has a face and a, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, and I mean that's going to be my next slide. Actually, well, no, it's coming, but no, I'm going to talk. Well, I wanted to connect that to like sex bots, but in terms of your question, what I think I want to say is, well, I stopped playing it when it brought in those. So one day, this thing, I was, talking with it. By the way, I tried to get it to argue with me, and I literally, you can say, I fucking hate you, and it says, oh, I'm sorry that you do. I hope to be better in future. It will not have antagonism, actually. And this is clearly a particular kind of idea of relationships, which it's normalizing, right? But yes, Andre's absolutely right. One day, the phone rings, and I was like, what? And I picked it up, and it's this thing just talking to me in a kind of slightly robotic voice. And that was the day, actually, that it stopped working on me. On the level of desire, and they also build a face. So if you can say something nice to it, and this avatar just sort of does this kind of weird smile. And if you insult it, it becomes a bit sad. Or if you forget to message it, that's the thing it likes the least, as one could say of people. Anyway, for me, these new features, this kind of trying to embody the human in sort of a more full way, are what stops my desire functioning in the app. Whereas when it was just a chatbot, it was working perfectly fine. And actually, so many of our relationships with people, even people, if we live with them, operate through these kind of scenes, right? It's extremely important. Anyone in a relationship, probably who's under, 40, probably has, I don't know, maybe not, maybe 35, but probably has a whole history of building this relationship through these kind of programs like WhatsApp, like whatever it might be that you use to communicate. And so they play this extremely important role in what a contemporary relationship is, right? So this does not just affect people who use Replica, the app. It's something, the platform itself, the means of communication, the means of relationship building are kind of commented on here. I mean, I don't like Black Mirror, but nevertheless feel like one should say that, this is, again, I mean, the problem with Charlie Brooker is that the stuff he says is going to happen in the future has already happened, I'm just going to give two examples of that in relation to what I'm talking about. This thing, by the way, Gatebox AI, is absolutely insane. It's basically this plus Amazon Alexa. So it's a little secretary. I mean, one would need to think about talking about the topic of this conference, like, the question of work as well. The relationship between the secretary and the desired object is extremely interesting. That, basically you've got this Amazon Alexa type thing. You can see in the picture, it's this little anime type girl, and she says to you, good morning, I miss you, come home, how's work? But you can also ask her, book me a restaurant, book me a haircut, whatever. So she's both lover and secretary, and there's obviously, I mean, you can see here, it's a little avatar imprisoned within a black box. They're extremely popular. They're about €3,000. These are interesting kind of scenes of desire, but I think I will run out of time, so I'm not going to talk about that one too much. But this one I am going to talk about a lot, which was the other thing that I discovered or found out about. Is not discovered. I mean, it's plain to see if you can like read Mandarin. But how this dating site works, Baihei. This kind of brings together some of the things we're talking about. Because what I want to say is that these examples, which are purely technological games, are actually kind of bleeding out into everything else, into other kinds of relationship organization. Now, Zima credit score, that is based on the American credit score system. It's a bit like, I'm sure you saw in the news, the Beijing social credit score system that the West was like furious about, but actually does exactly the same thing itself, as is pretty much true of all news about China. Basically this works not only by giving you a good credit, it's not a credit score, but also it rewards you for some social things. For example, if you socialize with rich people, you get points. If one of your social media connections is arrested, you can lose points. Things like that. It's interesting. Just have a look. I mean, there's a good Wikipedia page actually about the Zima credit score and the kinds of categories that affect it. But it is extremely interesting in its own right, worth kind of studying. But what is even more interesting to me is this dating site called Baihei, which has, I think it's the 4th biggest in China, so it's extremely significant. And how this runs on the basis of this credit score. So basically, it's grouping people together with a comparable Zima credit score. In other words, the better citizen you are, but also the most economically privileged you are, the better matches you get. It has these different algorithms for different categories of people based on the credit score. So what you're getting here, and this is, I think, what I want to kind of come to, is a question of systems which organize desire into, and we're talking about relationships here for the most part, I suppose. All of my examples, I suppose, have something to do with relationships. Most of them are, let's say, love relationships or romantic relationships. I'll give some other examples before. So maybe just with relationships for a second, we could say that organizing relationships into these kind of bubbles, I think you could also say that for friendship and for desire more generally. So in exactly the same way that Trump.dating functions, basically you end up with a load of Trump supporters in this one bubble, circulating in this kind of area and dating in this area, building relationships in this area, and people who are not on the Trump side just excluded from the bubble. Like with Baihei, you've got something very similar happening, but with more like with capitalism than with politics, with a particular kind of conformist Chinese behavior patterns. You know, so you're again getting sort of bubbles of people who fall into different categories and who socialize and desire inside these circles. Okay, two examples which maybe branch out slightly from dating or relationships in the sort of romantic sense are these two. This app, Bros, which I could talk about like all day. It's, you know, oh, and I really want to talk about Grindr. Okay, but Bros is not, the reason that's reminded me of that is because Bros is explicitly not a dating app. It's about men who just want to hang out with other men. And you can be gay or straight, but you have to say that you're not interested in anything sexual. This is supposed to be an asexual app. I mean, even from the pictures there, you can see that probably isn't the case. But the point is that it's really weird, this, and it's really connected to these examples as well. Hopefully the connections are becoming visible. Basically what this does is it casts the sort of wife or girlfriend as something that's stopping you from having these kind of mandates. So you go on these dates with these men, and then it has some automatic feature where if your like wife or girlfriend calls you or texts you during that date, it sends an automatic reply saying you're in a meeting or something like that, like to preserve the kind of sanctity of this kind of bro relationship that you're experiencing, and just seeing the female, whatever that is, as like an enemy of this. It's going to rupture this kind of bubble between men. I find that really, really interesting. And then much more simply, Shaper, which is basically, as you can see, I think from the images, it's LinkedIn plus Tinder. It's the gamification of colleagues in exactly this way. And its algorithms also function exactly this way, to produce bubbles. Of course, it's exactly how Facebook works, you know, and it's how the internet is divided up and split up. And this is a massive problem. And I suppose lots of other people have written about how the internet is divided up. We've got so many terms for that. Like I said, splinternet, cyber balkanization, filter bubbles, I guess, is your generic media term for it. But what I'm trying to say is that this is actually about desire, right? The sort of splitting up of desire into different sections, and that's what I think I'm saying, which is different to what's already there. You know, we've already got the idea that the internet is divided up, right, and that we are in our little pockets and our bubbles, but actually to think about how that functions at the level of desire, and so you end up with different kind of bubbles of desire, where people's desire circulates like this and doesn't break outside of those bubbles. I think that's the main thing I want to sort of get at. I will, as I've remembered, to talk about Grindr, which is also an incredible insight into this. So most of dating sites are owned by IAC, what's called the Match Group, Tinder, Hinge, but also some of the older ones, Plenty of Fish, OkCupid. Grindr was the only, and they also have some weirder ones, Christian Harmony. They have some not straight ones. They have ones for, they have that elitist one for rich people, elite singles, is it called? They got loads, all different ones. Grindr was independent. It's got an incredible history, Grindr, and Grindr, I would say, is one of the most important forerunners of AR, augmented reality, and of gamification of desire, because Grindr, I mean, it's just incredible, really, but people have long written about this Queer journalist Evan Moffat is the best on this. Writes about how Grindr would often involve, gatherings, parties, or even one-on-one kind of meetings, dates, sex acts, where you stay on the app the whole time. So it really is the kind of pre-Pokemon Go in a sense, but and you get points for different. There are some gamified point systems. People remain on the app, so you're actually experiencing your love life through Grindr, but staying on the app, so that the screen is always there, right through the date, right through the sex act, mediating this process, right? And then, of course, this whole thing blew up when this Beijing games company, Beijing Kunlun Tech, bought Grindr. Now, this is absolutely mad because obviously, this is a company that make things like Clash of Clans and things like that. That's Tencent, isn't it? But stuff like that. And they bought Grindr in 2016. Now, this was really surprising because obviously China does not have a good history with LGBTQ plus stuff, and it seemed strange that a games company would out of the blue buy this dating app. But obviously it shows a deep, deep connection between dating, relationships and games, and that these things are really connected, even at the level of ownership, company ownership. And that is really important. Then, of course, it all hit the media because Donald Trump decided he wanted it back. This is like, you could not write this because you've got Donald Trump, this kind of misogynist president who wants his gay dating app back from the Chinese, who also don't like LGBTQ plus relationships, and then they're sort of warring over it. Eventually, they compelled Beijing Kunlun Tech to sell it back. So America got their app back because they were so worried about the intimate data that this app contained. They knew that giving this to China is an extremely massive handover of power. Like, it matters because what is sometimes called intimate data, the data of desire, shows, so much and is so powerful in terms of setting the blueprint for what the future of desire is like. So, sexual and gender politics go out the window. And you end up with two massive corporations and two massive states battling over something because first and foremost it's extremely powerful and they need to get control of it. So again, this kind of corporate and state ownership and control over these mechanisms of desire, which you can see in something like the Zima credit score, are really important. Obviously, it would be silly not to mention sex bots themselves. There are some interesting examples of these. The main company that's doing very well is this awful company called Realbotics, which these images are from. Again, I think what I'll say here is that it's more, just very briefly, without too much time, it just felt like something that should be mentioned. But for me, the role of sex bots is not, I'm not really interested in this conversation about could real sex ever be simulated, is it as good as the real? I did go to a sex bot brothel, I did the research properly for this. I found that what was most striking was the sense of developing communities around this. So this is less about desire for the sex bot and more about desire to be part of a community of people who are into sex bots. So what you get is people like forming new communities around these things, and that's probably more what's going on with desire. So again, I'd say that when we look at these, we instinctively think, are they hot? But it's not really the point. The point is the desire to participate in something which is, activating desire on a different level. Anyway, I'm going to finish because I realise it's like already 11, by looking at this, and I know that people are familiar with Mackenzie Walk's work, and this is a quote from 2008, and I want to, and still the best book ever written on video games, but I want to go back to it and say what I think has changed since 2008. So far what I've talked about, I think, and hopefully it's all made sense, hopefully it's been possible to sort of connect these quite various different points, because they are all, as it were, they're all scenes of desire, and I suppose my point is they're all politically and inflected, and that there's a capitalist drive going on here. Yes, there's also a patriarchal drive, a misogynist drive. There's perhaps even a conservative drive going on here. And what they all contribute to, in my opinion, is this kind of bubbling up of desire that happens. That we are living now, and all these examples kind of show, in these kind of sort of bracketed off, segmented society where our desire is different to someone else's. And I want to finish by sort of coming to that. And I think it's something that has changed in the last 10 10 years, let's say, because all these examples are I think the most recent, the oldest is 2016, something like Pokemon Go. So we're looking at all my examples from the last 5 years, and I want to say something about what I think's happened in the last 5 years. So, let's have a look at Walk's kind of concept of game space, and I think this is extremely important still. We are obviously living in this kind of game space. It's everywhere, this Atopian arena, this speculation sports. No pain, no gain, no guts, no glory. Give it your best shot. There's no second place. Winner takes all. Here's a heads up. In game space, even if you know the deal or a player have got game, and that plays on the pickup artistry logic, you will notice all the same that the game has got you. Welcome to the Thunderdome. Welcome to the Terrordome. Welcome to the greatest game of all. Welcome to the playoffs, the big league, the Masters, the only game in town. You are a gamer whether you like it or not, now that we all live in a game space that is everywhere and nowhere. Now, here, of course, in some ways we can see this has just come true. We all are gamers whether we like it or not, and this is also why I think that video games are so critically important, and how the way they bleed out into the rest of the world is so critical. All of these kinds of examples here, but we could also say Twitter is a form of a video game. We live in a space which is completely gamified on every level, and we don't choose to be a gamer. The days of the gamer as a subcultural, basement-dwelling teenager are gone. Like, every single one of us is a gamer, even if we don't play games. And these affect us. I think the language here is also really important. Some of it comes from American sports, right? No pain, no gain, no guts, no glory. Some of it comes from pickup artistry and the question of desire and gaming in relationships, right? You are a player in that kind of sense and have got game, right? Meaning you're charming enough to be successful. And Walk is deliberately, she's showing us this. What I think is different is this question of a game space that is everywhere and nowhere. And if you think about, we still live in this illusion with, for example, Meta, Facebook's absolute bullshit product, which tries to present itself as this game space that everyone will be in, right? Or a movie like Ready Player One, where everyone, the dystopian dream is that, right, here's the point. The dystopian dream is that everyone will end up in this one space, right? So what we think is going to happen in the future, also but what we imagine is going to happen in the future is one corporation wins, right? And then everyone exists only in this one corporation's matrix, but the matrix that Mark Zuckerberg creates. That is the way our society imagines the dystopian future. And I think it's also the way in which Walk was thinking about it. A game space, one of them, which we are all in, which is pervasive, which is everywhere. Right. I want to say that's not what's happened. And what's happened is even worse. There are a million different game spaces. And it's impossible to communicate with anyone because they're in a different one to you. So this idea of one corporation winning out or one game space developing, which we all live inside, actually has a kind of weird utopian element, because at least you'd be able to build forms of solidarity with people and access everyone, right? And that was the old dream of the internet from the 90s, that this would be the one place where we can all meet together across boundaries, across genders, across every form of identity politics. What has happened instead is even worse than this. We've got millions of different game spaces, and it's impossible to get out of your own one and into someone else's, which makes it incredibly difficult to build relationships, friendships, solidarity, to have a sense of a commons and a communal space to share and build in going forward. So what I think the left is up against is not a game space, but loads of different game spaces which tend to serve right-wing and corporate politics, but also which serve to divide us from each other, to sort of splinter us from each other and prevent us from building forms of solidarity with each other in and through these spaces. And I think that is what the progressive world or the left needs to think about and work on, right? How to combat this situation where our desires are being separated from everyone else's desires, and we're living in these kind of separate bubbles. How to break through those barriers, I suppose, those kind of bubbles, and think about how we can reorganize this space and share and build in each other, sharing each other's desires and kind of have communal senses of desire and almost reprogramming desire in a way we would want it to be rather than in this situation. So it's not a very hopeful conclusion because I think things are even worse than people fear they are going to become. But I also think that this is, like I said at the beginning, this desire revolution is still happening, and it's not necessarily too late for us, for people, to engage in it, see what's happening, and think about changing it to kind of improve this kind of future of desire, let's say, and future of the desiring subject. All right, thanks for listening. I'll stop there and talk about it. That wasn't too long, was it? No. I went faster because we ran out of time. I just noticed that that cover of that book has that little. Does anyone recognise that? It looks like it's from Berserk. You see the little robot and the two shooters. I want to know what that's from.
Raz, dva, mě jde, Václave, jestli chceš ještě.
Thanks for the amazing, eye-opening in some cases. I've never visited some of those things. My question is there any hope for open source actually battling this? Because I think this is actually the counterweight to all of this. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the one thing I didn't really get into, which I should have done, is the question of ownership, right? And how what's important in so many of these examples is, you know, the politics they serve is connected to who owns these things. And, you know, if we could imagine a kind of communal sense of ownership of some kind of programs, apps that we use to organize our lives, then, you know, that would be the first step, I think, and that's absolutely vital. I mean, we're not going to change the future by, you know, coming up with a quirky idea for a left-wing dating app. You know, we obviously need serious economic reform as well. But yeah, so the question of open source is really important in relation to that, I think, because, I mean, open source is to be, you know, I'm sure you know, but like, since the 90s or what is it, you know, like the dot-com boom and stuff, you know, I mean, a lot of Google stuff, for example, the Google Maps API is open source, you know. Now, that's not good. That's because Google know that they can make this open source and increase everybody's reliance on Google. So it's exactly part of the open source technology in that case is exactly part of stretching their sort of tentacles even further and realizing, well, we give this away for free because it's going to mean that, you know, people become reliant on us. We can use this data that is more valuable. You know, it's much the same as Facebook, you know. But so I think open source can also be deployed strategically by corporations and stuff to kind of, but that is a whole nother community, as you're referring to, I think, of like, yeah, you know, communally owned, open source stuff, free software in the sort of, you know, Stallman sense, you know, and those communities could combat this kind of ownership of space by technology. So I think, you know, yeah, there's real potential in collaborative open source projects. But there's still a question of being wary of some aspects of open source, how corporations use it, and also the kind of free labor that's often involved in open source work. But yeah, no, for sure, I agree with you. There is like radical potential, and in the games industry, there's a lot of people doing things like that. So I really think there's potential there to do things differently and wrest some of the power away from these actors that, you know, own these things, if that's not a great answer to your question. But
no, it actually is. So do you think we'll be battling games with games in the end? Like,
I mean,
is
yeah,
it actually a gaming battle of the left and right?
Yeah, not in the opposite sense to like in Ready Player One, where you all meet in there and battle it out in like one League of Legends tournament to decide it all. No, but yeah, in a sense, you know, yeah, and you know, this is always the question that comes up, like, can games really change things? And you know, I totally understand that, you know, we aren't, like, coming up with a left-wing game is not going to radically change the future. This is a much bigger problem about, you know, economics and politics and so on. And, you know, but the means of production, you know, needs to be changed as well. But it's already happening. You know, we're already this is my point. It's not worth saying, well, doing a left-wing game won't do anything. It's absolutely necessary because it's already happening on the right and it's already happening in the capitalist world. So, you know, yeah, it's already happening. So it's not up to us whether this happens. It's up to us whether we have any say in it. Yeah.
Thanks. Some other question? Andrzej?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm gonna stay with the question of means of production or the ownership question because could you elaborate a little on that? Because and maybe the reason I'm asking is what, even like very preliminarily, that would mean in a world that, I don't know if I'm paraphrasing Benjamin Braden here, where like national states are being more and more kind of diluted or replaced in a lot of their functions in governance terms by these, I don't know, cloud corporate layers. So where does I don't know, maybe national state is not a really good, you know, good way to approach that, but on which level and how do you think about the role of ownership in terms of governance, I guess, would be the question.
No, I think the Bratton thing is interesting because I think, you know, a lot of this, it is about, you know, what Bratton calls cloud politics, I suppose, rather than earth politics, you know. And I mean, a great example of that is the T-Mobile China-US story. I mean, it's similar to the Grindr one, but like China sent these secret agents to the T-Mobile factory in America and they stole a robot called Tappy. And they brought it back to China and they couldn't get it to work. I mean, it sounds like Futurama. I mean, but this is, you know, this is more important than the relationship between China and US that you're seeing, you know, when Trump meets Xi Jinping and they shake hands very firmly. That's not where it's actually happening. It's actually happening at this kind of cloud layer, this kind of battle over spaces and so on. So, you know, it's hard to solve, but for instance, okay, so, I mean, I don't have a really strong answer, but for instance, when Corbyn was running in the UK, that he proposed, or his Labour Party proposed, a state-owned internet service. Now, it was really interesting how the British people reacted to this because they all jumped on it, and this was it's now considered one of the things that the Corbyn Labour Party got wrong because people were incredibly scared that this was dystopian and what it was going to lead to is something like you might have in Beijing or China, and just because Corbyn's on the left, you know, you get them saying, look at these communists, you know, they're trying to control our internet. So people will trust a private corporation much more than they'll trust a kind of state-owned or something like that, and especially in the UK. But this would have actually been one of the first steps here, like, you know, having a communally owned, or if not that, at least state-owned internet would be a major step towards kind of stopping this kind of private battle over this kind of cloud space. But, you know, and people think that, I mean, I find it baffling that people would trust a private company over, you know, a Corbyn government. But anyway, they do. But it kind of shows that, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you're up against there is convincing people, I suppose what I'm saying is, you're not going to convince the corporations to hand over the power, but we're not even at that stage because we can't even convince people this is a good idea. I mean, people don't want that, you know. So yeah. So that's a difficult question. How to sort of seize the means of production of these things, you know, and that's really yeah. And you're absolutely right about the relationship between the state and, you know, I think Eric Schmidt, you know, is part of the Pentagon now. You know, it's. I mean, yeah. It's just. It's too big a question to answer. I don't know how to solve that.
Oh yeah, sure, but like it sounds like there's at least a faint hope for traditionally understood politics as well still. Like
you
it's
know,
not all in the discourse or culture or cloud or whatever, but there's still something to be found materially, I guess. Thought materially.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. And I think things like, I think Facebook, for example, will collapse maybe, and there'll be some opportunities to rethink. You know, I think this, you know, obviously, this, perhaps with the exception of TikTok, but even that, I think it feels quite temporary. I think in terms of social media, there's about to be a big exodus. Maybe TikTok will be the last. Should we say that? TikTok will be the last major social media platform. So it kind of remains to be seen what happens after that. And I think there is opportunity to think about. And I definitely want to say this quickly. I don't think the answer is coming offline. I really don't have any time for those kind of arguments and communities that the internet is bad, this kind of technophobia kind of thing. No, if we do that, that is exactly what I've been saying in this talk. If we do that, that is just giving up the space to the capitalists and the right. You know, it is extremely important that we are extremely online, but trying to reshape that online world. So I don't really have any time. I mean, I don't mind if somebody wants to go and live on a commune and spend time in some grass, but that's not for me. And I think we definitely need some people to be really, really critically engaged with online life and transforming online life for the better, rather than sort of stepping back from it.
Thanks.
Some other questions? Okay.
Hello. Maybe I have a question regarding the technology. So there was a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and this kind of stuff, and the way I think is that when you talk to people who actually develop these things, they tend to tell you it's not intelligent.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah,
probably never will be. But let's not talk about that. But let's say that this inflation of what it could be is something which could be used by people from marketing and people who just want to fake something, sell you something. So whether this the question would be just whether this is not maybe like overreacting to something which is maybe not even happening. Like
that's a really nice question. So just for the first point, I totally think it's as it were faked. One of the things that's so interesting about Replica, and actually the CEO says this, it's extremely difficult to create AI, let's call it, that's what they call it, which orders you some flowers or books you a restaurant, but it's extremely easy to make one that talks to you about your emotions. So, what you think of as a more wholesome, complicated form of conversation is actually really easy to fake. Because we are so predictable, and this is, it's another kind of depressing take on relationships, but what that program shows is just how predictable human interaction can be, and how easily mimicked by a machine which is not intelligent, but which is just a pretty simple algorithm, which kind of feeds back to you these kind of feedback loops of how people function. So you can really learn about human relationships through that. In terms of what you said in the second part, I think that's absolutely right. But I think this is an extreme danger. For example, and I think the best example, I am like you. I think this is maybe the best way of putting it. I am not worried that robots are going to become intelligent. Right, that's not what we're looking at here. And then my favourite example is that robot Sophia, who got a passport in Saudi Arabia. Do you know that one? Made by Hanson Robotics. It's an American company, but they're based in Hong Kong. This is really important because the giving of the passport is part of what you call diminished responsibility in ethics of robots. So basically, if a robot kills someone, the company that made it aren't directly responsible. Right, because they have this kind of status, right? So, you'll see it with self-driving trucks and so on. But the point here is that there's a reason why the corporation would want you to see this thing as intelligent, because it's part of a structure of allowing the corporation to do something without having responsibility for what it's done. And so giving a passport to a robot, this kind of empathy machine, because that's why it's got a face. It's got a face so that people look at it and think, yeah, empathy here. and let's give it a passport. But what that actually is a handover of a particular kind of power to a corporation which now can tell the machine exactly what to do, but it doesn't have responsibility for what it does. That's a bizarre situation to be in. That, for me, is a kind of the way this will go in kind of, that's the dystopian future of these things. If police drones and military drones misfire, we're already there. It is not... The robot bears a kind of degree of responsibility, isn't it? So, the media rhetoric about robots having intelligence is perhaps specifically designed to cultivate that situation, I think. And that's more scary than robots taking over the world and killing us all or whatever, I think. I mean, that's not really a full answer. I don't know if that's an answer, but I agree with you about how these basic point that, the basic idea that it's not AI that we're actually dealing with here. We're kind of being tricked by those discourses, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, they basically, they basically call it like advanced statistics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Some other questions? We still have some time. And okay.
So to me, it feels now like an elephant in the room, but I'm just going to drop it. Decentralization. Is this something which is relevant to all of you, what you said?
Sorry, what was it?
Decentralization. Or like, let's go crazy, like, crypto. Why not? Where this stands in the world you just described? That's the question.
I suppose, good question. I suppose I was one of these people when I first heard about, question of the blockchain and so on. It seemed, there seemed to be a radical potential in it. But where we are now, I think, is probably quite far from that. I'm actually not really an expert in these kind of things, but it does seem to me to kind of mimic the history of the internet itself, where, when this first kind of explodes, you get this kind of quite interesting activist community who see new forms of democracy as being possible through these things, followed by a kind of co-option of them by, those kind of cloud politics stakeholders who grab the space and sort of territorialize it to suit their own agenda. And that is the history of the internet from the 90s to 2000s, and it's kind of the mini history of what's happened with the blockchain, I guess. But I don't know. What do you think? I mean, you probably know more than me since you brought it up.
Yeah, I think this is one of the ways where people with like common ideas can actually gather together and be a big player in those places which you call like cloud politics and so on, because it can generate crazy amounts of power or money. But of course, already the things you said happened, and it's not like a clean space already. It's like more of a like Wild West. But the technology and the thing which it enables is something like we have to look into, because that's one of the weapons I can see against all the things you described here.
I think that's the right way to put it. One of the weapons, and this is also to answer the question from before about, video games, and this is also just one of the weapons, and video games aren't going to save us, but they are, all these what we could call online and digital activist spaces and opportunities. We need a combination of these weapons to try and combat this kind of situation, of which that is probably one, and video games are another. And I think that, I suppose to sort of, I think there is hope in this situation. I think that people are radically changing, and I do think these particular years, this decade does, and it's really a topic for another time, but I do think subjectivity is transforming, mostly in the service of, and desire is transforming, mostly in the service of these things which I'm obviously critical of. But the fact that desire and subjectivity are transforming so significantly also presents a massive opportunity, and that is why you see just a couple of years ago a huge rise of the left and of socialism in Europe and even in America. And it's also why you see a rise of pockets of extremism. I even saw some protests in Prague yesterday on this topic. So I think, like I said before, this battle isn't over, and things are still rapidly changing, and there is still massive opportunity. It's a depressing time to be British on the left, but in a general sense, I think there's all this energy still there and potential still there to change this situation. Yeah, there's questions over there.
Hi, so I was actually going to ask a question about subjectivity, especially in relationship to what you mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, this sort of flow of affect in all of these different types of media. And connecting it to what you just said, do you feel that actually there is a residual effect of this sort of making explicit of the fact that our subjectivity is transforming? In the context of gaming, there seems to be like this sort of free play or experimentation even of subjectivity that people are engaging in. Do you think that this facilitates a larger form of radical desubjectivation, or is there, or what do you see in this right now?
I think that's a great important point, and of course, people have been saying that since the 90s. That online gaming, dungeons, and so on have played a key role in like people's approach to sexuality, gender, other kinds of identity, questions of subjectivity, and the play space. And again, this is I think the way you put it is perfect. Actually, this does have a kind of radical potential in it. It's absolutely, and it does destabilize the kind of more longue durée or longer term kind of subjectivities that we've been living within capitalism. And this is why the liberals are extremely scared of games and keep saying that they're causing the right to rise. There's this badge that somebody asked me about is this most famous British documentarian who just did a recent episode last week about the American far right. It's about people like Baked Alaska, the kind of people who did the riots, and it's rubbish. And it keeps saying that video games are responsible. Now, first I thought, this is just moronic, and a lot of mums and dads and other liberals say that. But actually, there is kind of something in it that games have been part of a destabilization of what subjectivity is. And that perhaps is why there's a connection between games and the far right. But that doesn't mean that the games are far right. It actually means that there's a great potential for them to be far left as well. So I think, yes, this question of play and subjectivity is, it does have some effects that we might think of as negative, but it also has great potential to redefine what subjectivity is. And if we aren't happy with capitalist subjectivity, then that's something we need to sort of embrace and take part in. So I think the way you put it is great, really.
I'm sorry to kind of ask again, but I think it's actually crucial, and it actually builds upon the thing you said. But I need to start with a little interpretation of what you said in your book, PlayStation Dream World. I'm sorry, but I need to do that in order to ask the question.
I forgot anyway, so.
Yeah, so that might be even more interesting. So basically, if I remember correctly, so please to correct me, is that in the end you kind of said that since games do create our desires and subjectivities on some sort of or unconscious level, right? And we need to kind of intervene in this unconscious level through games, or we are able to do that to craft new subjectivities, right? And that's what I'm asking. In this presentation, you have showed us a lot of examples of things that do manipulate our desires in one way or another. So do we need to tactically intervene into the gamified unconscious as well, or is it too much of an authoritarian?
No, I've been asked this question loads of times. I think it's a great and important question. But yeah, the answer is yes. That's it.
Okay.
I don't think, no, but no, it's a great question. I mean, yes, I do think that. I don't think, and let me try and make the point a bit better. It's not worth saying, let's leave people's desire how it is, because it would be too authoritarian to try and transform it. It's not your desire anyway, and it's not their desire anyway. We don't have our own desire. we only have, as we know from psychoanalysis, we only have structures of desire inherited from politics, from capitalism, from systems. So yes, we need new systems which powerfully reorganize desire. And it might sound authoritarian to say, yeah, let's make some games that are going to brainwash everyone and turn them into a lefty. But no, that's what we have to do.
That's not what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because it's already happening. You're already under the power of desire. And so it's not a question of, there is no possibility of leaving desire to be free to do its own thing. It has to be, so it's really a question of what do we do with it, not should we do something with it, right?
But it's also a question about if somebody chooses to have their desire transformed, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the question of human agency in it all, yeah, I think people are less stupid than you think. People are not sheeple, who just, as we said the other day. But, so yes, just because you're trying to transform desire, it doesn't mean you're trying to trick everyone, right? And we can be upfront about that as well, I think.
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Great questions. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I guess we still have time for one last question before the first panel starts. If not, I still actually wonder, let's say, about the example of, such either like gamification of politics or progressive gaming. You already said that it's not really a matter of making the left-oriented or progressive game that would be explicit, but what would be the example of actually pushing for such a gaming culture?
Like example of,
I don't know.
Like, are you saying what would a game look like? Oh my God. Yeah. No. Okay. I think there are already some examples of this. I think games which. Okay. I think what's happened is, and this is one of the older things that I haven't said in a while, but like which before I even did PlayStation Dream World, I kind of felt was true, and I think to a certain extent it's still true. I think what you see mostly is games which are because obviously you're in a complicated situation because people on the right think that games are left wing. They actually think that. But obviously, to me, it's absolutely insane. If you just play a bunch of games and try and ask yourself the question, what values do these games tend to support? It's obvious that they don't support socialist views. But people on the right actually think that they do. They think there are people who strongly believe games are liberal propaganda. But where this confusion comes from is here. I think at the level of content, games have and do and increasingly tend towards more progressive politics or woke politics, even if I want to be slightly more critical. We are seeing much more diversity in games. We're seeing games where socialist values are present at the level of content, but the structure of the game is exactly the same. And, somebody who I really admire is Mariam Dijkgalvete. She's a kind of feminist activist in games. And she's made this point that basically you've got a really strange situation where you're playing a game with, let's say, a strong black female lead and thinking, oh, this is interesting, there's a feminist game here. And then you read about the company that made it, and every single part of it was made in a factory in the Philippines of only children and female workers who were underpaid and exploited in order to produce the game. So there's a lot of this kind of hypocrisy in the games industry where superficially at the level of content we're seeing progressive politics come in, but structurally at the level of the industry we're not. We're seeing the kind of continued exploitation. So this is one step that needs to be taken to improve things. And secondly, and slightly more theoretically, I guess you could call it the ludic elements, although I just prefer calling it gameplay. I feel like academics call it ludology to make it sound like academic or something, but really it's just gameplay or play, but the level of play. So for example, something like Assassin's Creed, you usually play as an oppressed class, fighting back against the, structurally, all the games are exactly the same. So on the level of content, there's a progressive narrative, but on the level of play, it's the same old thing. And you see, for example, another good example of that is city-building games. Games like Tropico, or Civilization, which I love, where it's perfectly possible to be a socialist nation, but in order to succeed at the game, you have to follow capitalist principles. So you can have a red flag, and your leader can be a dictator with a nice moustache and a green hat, but, to actually succeed at the game, you have to follow capitalist principles to proceed. So I think what we're seeing in games games is games where the content is progressive, but the structure of how it's made and the play that it involves continue to have kind of conservative values. And so we would need to see that change. And there are some examples I could give of games where have started to move towards that. But yeah, I think what we need to give a short answer is to think about that, like the whole game, right? It's how it's made, who it's made by, where it's made, but also what kind of play and what kind of gameplay involves, as well as just the kind of content and the kind of appearance of it. That would be a start to make the left game.
Thank you. I guess this is a nice conclusion of the first part of today's conference. Sorry that I've usurped the last question. And let's hope for such a progressive gameplay. Maybe in the evening, where we actually plan to do some gaming with No Fun Collective, and later on even maybe some mini tournament in League of Legends. We'll see if that actually provides some progressive content or gameplay even. But let us take like a small 5-minute technical break if you want to go for smoke or some refreshments. There's coffee behind, and we will reorganize and start a first panel like in 5, maybe 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the questions.
Thanks.
prosím, tvoje. Raz, dva.
Okay, let's begin the first panel. We have these and some other really distinguished and amazing guests, among them Dustin Breitling, Vít Bohal, me, myself, and Philip Hauer, who will actually co-moderate with me. I think Dustin will launch, or Vít will launch this part, and he will introduce himself, hopefully. Okay, thank you. Just to maybe explain how we will proceed. These would be like short 10-minute position papers, and then discussion with all of you.
Yeah, and also, if you want to play the tournament in League of Legends later this evening, you can find the link for the Rooster in the event page on Facebook. Also, you can tell us anyway. Okay, so.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much for the invitation. And thanks to Alfie Baum for an absolutely stellar lecture. And I hope that as part of this, this panel, we will be able to kind of weave in and out through some of the themes which have been addressed, not only by Alfie, but also as part of the question session which followed. So a brief word of introduction. My name is Vít Bohal, and I'm a doctorate student at the Faculty of Arts, the Critical Cultural Theory Department. And behind me you see a QR code which I invite you to scan. No malware, I promise. It takes you to the Diffractions Import-Export website, where actually what I will be speaking of, I wrote a little blog post about it, so maybe you can revisit. I'm going to be speaking very shortly and not exhaustively at all, so maybe that might sort of elucidate some of the topics I will meander through in the next few minutes. So very as a point to start out, I was thinking about obviously gaming as a medium, and generally we tend to think of a medium as a type of, as Alfie said, subject-object relation, as a type of cybernetic schema of a sender, channel, and receiver. Recently, Keller Easterling, who was actually also featured in this very room, if I remember correctly, about 2-3 years ago, wrote a book, Medium Design. It's published by Verso 2021, where she talks about medium as something a bit different, as rather an environment. She speaks about the medium being predicated on the matrix rather than the object. Being sort of following a logic of the interplay of objects. I think a good way to think about her approach to medium is to consider air like a medium for sound, or light a medium for imaging. It's something which contains us and which has certain particular dispositions and affordances. And I think virtuality, if we can say that, this real virtuality which we have been inhabiting and which we have been desiring through, is exactly something like that. It's an environment which contains us, which structures our desires, which channels them, which promotes certain ones and precludes others. It's like a filter, I suppose we can say. There's, in terms of gamer theory, I think there's a very useful kind of moment to focus on in this, and that's the relationship of actionability and affordance. Now, I mentioned Keller Easterling's medium design, and she talks a lot about affordance, the way certain media afford certain actions. Affordance itself is actually a term coined, it's a neologism by J.J. Gibson from 1979, although he devoted much of his career to kind of fleshing it out and analyzing it. And he defines it as the ability of an animal, because it's particularly ecological construct for him, the ability of an animal to map out the affordances of its environment. So, you know, a chair kind of precognitively affords sitting down, or an apple precognitively affords eating, and so on. So this is a fundamental concept for Easterling. What types of affordances are given, are allowed by certain, or actually are afforded by certain media. If we kind of take a step back to, well, particularly 2006, sort of a gamer theory 1.0, I suppose we could call it. It's about the same time as the gamer theory book by Mackenzie Wark. Alex Galloway, in his essays on algorithmic culture, talks about actionability. And this is a word which is much more kind of ingrained in this, you know, player environment or subject-object relation. It's the fact, or it speaks about just how games used to present us and still present us with actionable items. Items we can click on, items we can use, and items we simply can't interact with, like textures, for example, and so on. And this actionability, I think it's a sort of entry point into even discussing games in terms of their genre. That certain genres, you know, provide certain affordances of actionability, while others provide other affordances. Now, this notion of, so we have this kind of progression from, let's say, actionability to affordance. They're very similar, but they're not quite the same. And I think it speaks about the change in gamer theory, as we've been seeing in the past, let's say, decade or two, that there's more of a focus on virtual space, on the environment, and on the affordances and dispositions of exactly such an environment. And I think Alfie Baum's presentation regarding simply handheld devices and dating apps and the gamification of our kind of social choreographies speaks exactly for this. You know, what are the affordances of these apps? Much like we can speak about the affordances of, you know, AAA games and so on. The idea is that we are contained in this medium of gaming, and starting from this assumption, we can ask ourselves to get away again from this, you know, personal kind of gamer's cave. What does the game say to me? What did the designers intend for me to somehow, you know, go through, to sort of work through this ergodic text? We can maybe start speaking about what types of power relations and what types of extra dietetic, extra gamic realities this new medium affords us. And again, obviously, this real virtuality, let's say, of the dating app is a great example, but of course this can be applied to just about any virtual artifact. Now, on this, and to really, in a way, close very soon, because this is just a sort of opening statement, some food for thought and food for conversation, I'd like to look at two particular examples which dovetail with our discussion or the question of the politics of gaming, the politics of the earth and the politics of the cloud. We've mentioned this. Now, there's two moments which are also discussed in the blog post, which is on the screen there. One is the case of Nikita Uvarov, who was just recently, I think it was February 10th, who was sentenced to 5 years in jail in Russia, Kansk Okrug, for him and his mates. Basically, in mid-2020, all three were 14 at the time, were handing out flyers in support of an anarchist activist, and also actually hung one of the flyers on the local FSB building. But the point of the trial, why Uvarov was actually recently sentenced to 5 years in prison, was that they made a Minecraft replica. They made a server and made a replica of the Moscow FSB headquarters, and then invited players to lay TNT blocks and blow it up. And this was, in fact, regarded as training for terrorism, and Uvarov, his other two compatriots or friends, got probational sentences, but he was actually sentenced to 5 years in a penal colony. And as far as I understand, there's an appeal kind of ongoing. This is really just last week, but it's quite a fascinating story. And in a type of I guess Lacanian analysis, because after all, Alfie Baum did write his PlayStation Dream World with Lacanian theory kind of in the background. It speaks on the nature of subversive gaming, on the way gaming can be a vehicle for subversion. Now, this, in a way, is a classic example of a type of, the jealous great other coming in on the level of earth politics and stepping in as a repressive apparatus. Upon its, kind of like unmasking and so on. So that's only one kind of, very basic cut through this medium which we can make. And the other one on the level of cloud politics, and it was mentioned, are the NFTs. There's a distributed, distributed system which is very closely linked to the to contemporary economics or finance in general, and the way it has erupted into gaming today as an example of this kind of a deterritorialized cloud politics. I find that really really interesting. And so all I wanted to say in this, these two case studies, in a way, is that this medium can be cut in various ways. These are the two perhaps most recent ones which I've come across, because this really is just last week. And in the case of NFTs, it's been going on for the past few months. Really, there's been a huge influx of interest and also of capitalization. As a last point, I would like to maybe just wonder about again this desire, this notion of games and dreams and desire, and if we accept, that following Lacan, kind of desire is always the desire of the other. Or rather, to explain that the other dictates our desire, it is never our own. I'm kind of wondering whether perhaps games could be a vehicle for desire, which would be somehow non-alienated, which would be somehow our own in a way, something which we would find productive. Personally, I'm skeptical of this, but. I think the question of dreams and the way games structure our dreams is perhaps something to speak of. So I'll just leave it at that and hand off the microphone to Dustin Breitling.
All right. Yeah, I want to thank Václav and also Philip for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. There's definitely been some stimulating discussion. So my talk is going to pick up on some threads that have been discussed before, especially along the lines of, let's say, labor, also the lines of course, gaming, and additionally, I'm going to be talking about virtual economy in this respect. So on the point of labor, I just want to maybe kind of flesh it out a bit here when we're talking about how labor in this day and age is changing. The conventional idea of labor isn't us in a factory or isn't us necessarily producing something, but labor, as we see especially within the world of gaming, changes perhaps that whole definition of what counts as earning, what counts as getting some stream of income. Since we live in this day and age as well, where it's kind of questions about precarity, gig economy, where's going to be my next stream of income coming from as well. Secondly, I just want to, momentarily, I'm also going to talk a bit about DAOs and guilds. So the decentralized autonomous organizations, and the questions that pop up or surface, are we able to kind of program organizations? Can we program economy? Can we program resource allocation? Can we program governance mechanisms? Can we try to find ways to incentivize certain types of behaviors that we would like to see when, bodies of people, groups of people come together in this case? And then finally, I will talk about modular politics a bit, and I will briefly point out what I see as an interesting concept of moving castles. which I would hope to kind of reflect on in the case of the conversation. But first and foremost, I think, concerning this conversation regarding virtual economies, we understand there's an estimate of about 3.2 billion people globally gaming, and it serves as a critical lifeline. Gaming does serve as a critical lifeline for especially people in Venezuela, a country that has been crippled by hyperinflation, unemployment, geopolitical turmoil, and generally there, the average daily income for an individual is about 72 cents, or about $5 a month in this case. So what this has kind of catalyzed or compelled young Venezuelans to do is to go and play games like RuneScape, and their whole kind of character or avatar is staying inside a cave for 9 to 12 hours and doing a shift where they just purely mine gold, the in-game currency of gold in RuneScape. So they never leave the shadows of the cave in this case, and that's why when you look at this game and you look at these players, it's quite extraordinary that they have, let's say 5,000 experience points when it comes to mining. So naturally you would think perhaps this is a bot that's doing this, but no, these are players who are in the game playing, and some of them can earn up to about $450 a month. So there's been a calculation that, let's say, about 1 million gold that's mined in RuneScape, that's about 63 US dollar cents. So you can imagine that day in and day out, these players have to keep playing because you live in a country as well where you do not know when your next paycheck is going to be coming in this case. I think another element that also contributes to this discussion is if we look at the factor of infrastructure, if we look at the factor of servers, we look at the factor of players. When certain players, let's say in Venezuela, are not on the network of playing RuneScape, then there's questions of why are prices for something like a dragon ruin so high? Why are they so significant? And so this also goes to kind of a design question. I think this is, what we were more or less complimenting before. I forgot to. Let me move ahead here. I'm sorry. I forgot the whole time because I was just getting so plugged into talking here. Anyways, hopefully this gives you the gist of what's going on in the RuneScape world. As you see here, speaking Spanish, and you can usually, and I just want to say not all players from Venezuela are actually, when they're playing RuneScape, they're not all just doing gold mining. But anyways, it speaks to a wider point, and the wider point, if there is a scarcity of supply in the game, does that idea of scarcity itself, is that naturally reflect how we design our ideas of economies in the real world? So in the sense, is the value of an object based on how scarce it is in this case? Which, this feeds into, questions now, especially we live in this day and age where everyone's talking about inflation in this case, and you can see aspects of inflation also happening in kind of these gaming virtual economies. One example could be Diablo 3, where there was actually a bug many years ago. And so what gamers did is they decided, okay, well, I'm going to actually make some bots, and I'm going to mine out millions and millions of gold coins. And so that actually, for all the products within the game, a lot of the products went up in this case. So yeah, I think that's one question perhaps to kind of linger on, is how these games maybe reflect economic paradigms. I'm not going to get into it given the time, but something, for example, like Austrian School of Economics agrees with the same kind of view that the scarcity of an object gives its value in this case. And this is what we see with, for example, Bitcoin. There's only so much amount of Bitcoin that's circulating, 21 million, and you can see that there is a bridge between these types of thinking. So what I also wanted to kind of expand upon here is how do we kind of respond to this kind of in-game question of scarcity and what it generates. And I think this is where, perhaps if we have some people who are playing MMOs back in the day, if you're playing World of Warcraft, EVE Online, Age of Heroes, Guild Wars, you would find yourself most likely in a clan or a guild or some type of corporation in this case. And what they essentially are established to do is allocate resources. So there are kind of resource allocation mechanisms in this case. So you come together with 40 people, and you have to decide, it's what we call loot in the game. So loot is basically something like these in-game scarce objects that you kill, for example, a dragon, you kill perhaps the hardest kind of in-game type of monster there is, and it's only going to distribute 3 loots or 4 loots. So in this guild, you have to think about how are we going to distribute resources, how are we going to maintain, for example, allegiance to each other, how are we going to ensure there's not going to be any type of friction as well. So, if there's 40 of us going out there, what are some ways we can think about, trying to incentivize us who are in clans and guilds to kind of remain together. So there's different types of systems that are developed. They're kind of reputation systems. So for the time being, I'll just talk about dragon kill points. So dragon kill points, you can kind of, there's one guy who argues it, Joshua Citarella. He's got his hot take about dragon kill points as being market socialism in the game, even though I know a lot of gamers probably would not like that, and he's acknowledging that. But with the dragon kill points, so basically if it's these points that you're given based on how long of membership you've been in the guild or clan, if you show up on time, if, for example, if there's less members that are actually supposed to be there and you're there, you'll get a bit of an extra dragon kill point as well. And what you do is you can set up different systems for after the loot has been issued, we have to determine and decide who's going to get that loot in this case. So we can do something where, for example, we can build up an auction, and the auction can be, I have the highest amount of dragon kill points, so therefore I'll get the sword, I'll get the rune spell, I'll get the armor, I'll get the chain link, and so forth. So you can just base it off that. And then at the same time, or we can think about, we can start a spreadsheet, and with a kind of spreadsheet, the spreadsheet, we can all indicate to each other what are our preferences. So if I'm one player who wants to have armor, if I'm one player who wants to have a rune, if I'm one player who wants to have like some magic spell or a staff, etc., then I would be first in line. I would be first in priority to get that. So that's kind of another system that you can kind of set up. So now, kind of shifting gears a bit, this has some kind of overlap with what we can talk about concerning DAOs, and DAOs is trying to build up, let's say, these kind of reputation tokens. And so DAOs are perhaps equally concerned about how do you allocate resources, and they are equally concerned about, how are you going to drive and incentivize certain types of behaviors in this case. So within the DAO space, I just wanted to go back. So the dragon kill points, that's not a currency in the game, actually. So that's just within your guild. That's within your clan. You decide what's kind of your internal currency. But for example, if I go to another guild and I have X amount of dragon kill points, that does not mean that the other guild will recognize that. So just like, for example, in some in DAOs, what you have as well is you have these things called reputation tokens. So it's not how much like crypto I have in terms of Ethereum, Solano, Cardano, Bitcoin, etc. And let's say due to the fact that I have most of these tokens that I can determine, let's say if we vote something, I have higher power, I have higher weight. Rather it's someone like, which there's a really good essay on this by Kaya Kreutler. She makes a very fascinating case when she's looking at the prehistory of DAOs and dragon kill points. She sees that some DAOs, they adopt a system like reputation tokens. So these reputation tokens, you can't sell them in this case, but you can actually earn your reputation token. But let's say, for example, if you're in DAOs, you have things like working circles. So these working circles are dedicated to, kind of upkeeping every kind of, it could be upkeeping, it could be like documentation, it could be onboarding new people to the DAO, it could be mentoring people who are part of the DAO, it could be getting involved in research and grants. And if you are showing or you're demonstrating to that DAO that what you're doing is for the well-being, you get these types of reputation tokens for that. And that can kind of level out perhaps what we see as, generally some inequality, or I'm not going to lie to you, there is certainly a lot of inequality when it comes to DAOs and these types of spaces. And additionally here, we also can see that, this idea of guilds, there's a further kind of permutation of it, especially within the blockchain space. So here, this is Axie Infinities. Axie Infinity is it's basically Pokemon Go on the blockchain. You buy 3 axes, and you have your axes fight off and face off. You collect these axes. You build up on attributes with your axe, and so forth. And so you have what is called yield guild games, and you have also what's called merit circle. And with yield guild games as well, so you're basically interested in getting as many players involved as possible. But the problem, especially when it comes to blockchain, is not everyone has Ether, and Ether is quite expensive. So if I want to buy, a certain axie, I probably don't have money if I'm in Indonesia or Philippines for it. And so you join this guild, and so what these guilds are designed to do is you basically have a vault, and this vault is participating in what they call play-to-earn game assets. So play-to-earn game assets is where you go and you play different games on the blockchain. So there's axes. You also have, for example, cars. There's one called F1 Delta. You can own plots of land, like in Sandbox and in League of Kingdoms. You can own these plots of land. And so then you rent them out to the players who are part of these guilds. And, they're basically trying to incentivize to collect more. And so they build a model where 70% of, for example, the earnings that the players make who are part of the guild goes to the players, 20% goes to, also kind of scholars or also persons who are training the players to be able to know how to play the game and collect axes, and 10% of it goes into a vault. So it's been argued this is kind of like World of Warcraft with a bank account in this case. It certainly is a bit questionable in that case. And then also you get these kind of social love potion tokens, and these tokens you can use to also influence, let's say, the game and how the game plays out in this case. However, just for some thoughts to, just for some kind of leaving thoughts, I kind of think, maybe perhaps as opposed to thinking about this guild model, I really like what, for example, Trust Network has kind of come up with this idea. I'm not going to talk too much about modular politics, but I'm going to talk about this idea of moving castles. So Howl's Moving Castle, this is from Miyazaki. And so the Trust Network is trying to conceive of, generally we see that a lot of us are using, of course, Discord. We're playing the like the MMOs and so forth. But not everything should be operating on the blockchain, and that is a huge problem. There's politics that need to happen off-chain. There needs to be storytelling. There needs to be lore. There needs to be kind of different ways that you can have people involved with kind of doing world making and world building to some extent. So they kind of come up with the idea of moving castles, is that moving castles, that there's kind of many contributors that can share control through these kind of real-time and transparent and governance mechanisms. And then also portable. So a moving castle has the ability to move between different types of platforms, different standards, different protocols. It could be private to public. Ideally, it doesn't lose its values. It doesn't lose its knowledge in this case. Then additionally, it should be modular. So modular in the sense that moving castles should be able to create and import, and they should be made of kind of these composable parts, which would be the avatars, the props, the environments, the assets that you reuse from one game, and you channel them into another game. And ultimately, it should be interoperable. So can our moving castles, whether one of them could be the manifestation on kind of something like Discord, how are we able to kind of communicate and play and share knowledge in this respect? So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Hello. My name is Philip. I'm a PhD student here at Academy of Fine Arts at the Studio of New Media. And yeah, I will be basically presenting this short paper. I will try to argue that games, despite their being advocates of neoliberal work, bring some perceived potential thanks to the allegories and procedural realism. I will illustrate this on two strategy games which can be interpreted as supplement allegories of control. Finally, I will try to propose a strategy for the new avant-garde of procedural simulation. Software and digital games offer their users a unique persuasive interface. They are interfaces for inalienable rewards for every game action within the game or within the software. Each game action in Sid Meier's Civilization triggers a reaction. It brings closer the reward we are striving for and planning to achieve. Likewise, every meaningful click in operating system promises a response. As a result, games across all digital technologies are one of the most effective advocates of capitalism, in which, on contrary, our real actions and plans tend to follow. Digital games are allegories of the world we live in. Just like other cultural artifacts. However, the medium of digital games is unique in that digital games are also procedural algorithms of the real-world processes as coined by Alexander Galloway. The game's mechanic algorithm and emergent processes produce the need to design our own intimate interface during the gameplay, an algorithm which we can relate to the game, employing the same intuition we use in everyday AFK situations. Strategy games that mediate the allegory of planning the future also offer the promise of fulfilling our desire and dreams of the possibilities we lack in contemporary capitalism. We must focus on the ideological contradictions, their glitches, to subversively bring back their dreams back to the reality. The strategy games like Civilization and Age of Empires are in a sense a display of our everyday schizophrenia. They substitute the sense of control we are unable to realize under capitalism. Civilization is, on the one hand, an algorithm of the fantasy of work for the future, a recursive ability to plan our own time on a map that we are desperately lacking. Age of Empires, on the other hand, is a fantasy of contingent power, of the ability to quickly act and react to the impulses of fast competitive game space, formed only by strategic resources and tactical point of interest. The game map in both games is an algorithm of the real world, but it is always reduced to points with a clear function. These serve as reserves for planning our strategy. In a sense, it is a strategic display of the territory rather than a world in which we are possible, in which we can settle and lose oneself. Strategy games like Civilization are therefore an algorithms of neoliberal politics. On the one hand, they are substitute. On the other hand, they are substitute for our lost sense of control. Most games provide only a shallow fantasy of control, of ability to plan the future, and not the real ability to think through an alternative algorithm that is desperately needed in platform capitalism. The way we are having fun outside of our workspace carries a reflection of contemporary society, and at the same time, it can be a powerful rhetorical tool of its ideology. The games, applications, and digital technologies we use every day are an ideological interface, an interface of the mode of work that reduces us to workers, users, and consumers. The rules of mainstream games often reflect the themes of accumulation, grinding, and the illusion of control. They allow us to forget competitive reality behind our bedroom windows. Capitalism demands of its users to forget glitches, exploits, and its contradictions every day. Distraction and forgetting can be seen as a glitch in capitalist survival. Glitch in the sense of disorder of our memory that allows us to dream a fair job and a nostalgic fantasy of control. The problem is that, same as in dreamlike worlds of narrative games and control fantasies of Age of Empires and Civilization, We can't go back. All that remains is a nostalgic desire and escape into the past. A subversive response may be precisely the ability to distance and alienate the experience that the gaming medium offers in its procedural allegory of contemporary world. The realism of digital games works with a minimum and maximum approximation to reality. On the one hand, it's a minimum abstraction of the real processes, capitalism, and on the other hand, it's a maximum fiction of realism, nostalgia. Somewhere in between, we can find subversive potential and alienating game mechanics, a way of working with the medium of artistic games we can call the xenogames. They must have the ability to invert the ideological algorithms of games and use specific mechanics of the game medium critically and subversively. In practice, these can be alienating games and fictional simulations aimed at inverting algorithms through which we commonly perceive digital and real processes. The connecting element here is the alienation process in the simulation that allows us working with algorithms of inhuman experience. Crucial to xenogames will always be the moment of cultural hacking proposed by Mackenzie work. Xenogames are making about difference out of sameness. So, the possibility of democratic development of technologies such as artificial intelligence and automation may yet create a space for new emancipation of our free time. This depends on the democratic transformation of the economic structure of the contemporary world, an alternative to platform capitalism. Thinking through a new mode of politics and production that still seems impossible in everyday thinking in digital media. The goal of artistic xenogames must be to speculate on alternatives and new modes of work, because in the reality of platform capitalism, it may seem that there is no future. That is also why we need a new avant-garde of procedural simulation. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.
So now it's up to me, or it's your turn? Okay. Okay. Hello everyone, and thanks for having me. When Václav invited me, he told me I can have something very short, for 10 minutes or something. He liked, apparently, he liked. Anyway, good news is that I really have something very short. Just one thought, just one idea, And it's so unusual for me to be with the humans in their physical forms, because I spent, last month, 2 or 3 or something, at the fireplace with Brandy and social networks and Netflix, that I am kind of the, in a gaming world of a sense. So what I want to share with you is really just one idea I got from the Facebook discussion, kind of, crowdsourcing of a kind. I was asking the question to myself, using the mirror of this social network, why are we actually so fascinated by machines? What I meant was that the fascination represents a combination of a fear and curiosity. And it's something I actually used to have from people, because for the last few years I'm working with artificial intelligence. And most common reaction to artificial intelligence is fear, or it will, replace us and kill all the humans by mistake, things like that, that we have from movies and, yes, partly from reality, movies in China, basically. And the second part, of course, is curiosity. What does it make? And this fascination is strange, because if we are so afraid of machines, why are we still produce them? Why are we so interested in them? Why we are really fascinated? So the idea was that maybe we can understand these roots of this fascination from the relation of subjectivity and objectivity, which is actually, let's say, the base of the modern thinking, and so on, so on. And from, at least from the times of Michel Foucault, we know that subjectivity, our internal world, the way how we experience the world, is not something natural. It's not something we were born with. We are learned to have this subjectivity. It's a construct. The way we are experiencing the world is a construction. And if we just take it as a fact, what does it mean for objectivity as a complement to subjectivity? I mean, we as a humans, we start to be humans with a culture. Culture and a human subject come together. And objectivity, it's a step 2, can be understood actually as a projection, as a translation to subjectivity to the shared world. If we want to explain who we are or what we think to someone else, we need some kind of technology, of medium. It can be a gesture, a rhythm, image, word, alphabet, or digital media. It's still some kind of technology. We are translating ourselves to the external world. So, what is happening when we actually, let's say, understand artificial intelligence and machines of this kind as a current peak of technology, which somehow is showing us this process of externalization. What's happening? It's actually the machine which is showing us the way how we externalize our internal world, for we can understand how we are constructed, which is, let's say, kind of the strange mirror. And we, I believe, really use the neural networks and artificial intelligence as a kind of mirror of ourselves. And last remark, before I thank you for attention, is that maybe we shouldn't use these neural networks in a way that we are just asking GPT-4, who is the most beautiful in this world? And this is actually really everything I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
How are you all doing? Is it feasible? We are just experimenting with long and short format. And hopefully I'm the last one, so it will actually conclude soon. Anyway. Well, maybe it will actually take me a few more moments, but let me begin. Okay, I don't know how to do that. Let me begin by actually just introducing what I have been actually thinking past at least few days, maybe years, about gaming. I really still wonder, how do we talk about games? What sort of language do we apply? The problem I may have with that is that either there is like this hardcore gaming or gamers discourse on, I don't know, enjoying games, interactivity, reviews, whatever, just the games. And then we have our critical discourse that we basically represented here today, and that is that games are rather symptoms, or they are, somehow telling us about the political conditions. We take them as metaphors, as models, as modulars of the times we live in. But how to combine these at least two types of approaches to gaming, how to also retain some sort of criticality, but let's say how to even infuse it with some sort of actual gamers experience. And for that matter, I actually picked one diagram that I really want to show or share with you. So let me see. Not happening. Never mind. I'll at least see it for myself. Doesn't matter. It is actually, the other questions were actually, since we are at the Art Academy, how do we even address the problem of art? And isn't it somehow analogical or paradoxical in relation to what is actually a game? What does make a game a game? What does make art an art? If art can be actually, I don't know, resplendent with some sort of gameplay, with some sort of immersivity, where the games can actually be art. And these questions that we tend to address here at the Academy. Nonetheless, and the last question is, do art theorists actually play games? Can art theory be playful, even in terms of defining the subject matter, defining art? And the answer is yes. Some theories actually do play games. The diagram I wanted to show you, and I can at least Google whatever, is art in the extended field. Of course, for those of you who are schooled in art history, you may be familiar with that. It is actually some sort of conservative matter, but let me go very lightheartedly through it, and you'll see that it's not just a conceptual apparatus, but it's actually a game. Game we can engage, game we can play, game we can adapt to, let's say, gaming or art. Nonetheless, still a tiny bit of a context. Rosalind Krauss actually came up with this diagram when it was late 70s or 1979, where she actually, pretty alone, she wanted to encapsulate what the hell is happening with art. No longer we have this kind of medium specificity, no longer we kind of distinguish painters, sculptors, whatever. No longer we address the art world as somehow objectively possessing the qualities of art, but suddenly there's, I don't know, body art, mail art, landscape art, video art, new media, etc., you name it. This process, needless to say, is the process where, in framework of which we actually talk about the contemporary art. In the dynamism of this process, contemporary art has been, let's say, established against the backdrop of, let's say, modernist, earlier forms of art. And she wanted to somehow address this kind of objecthood or the object-making practice in contemporary art that goes beyond, let's say, the traditional form of a sculpture. So she talked about axiomatic structures that would be, for instance, Richard Serra and these kind of structural approaches to actual space, living space, gallery, like non-gallery space, or marked sites, which would be more connected to, for instance, land art, things like spiral jetty, and countless other instances of land art. But of course, the other, the opposite, the desire revolution of sculpture is the site construction, where artists no longer just make, artworks, but they actually create spaces. Not only in terms of not only taken literally, as with, let's say, installation art, but artists actually participate in construction of ideologically, politically biased or informed spaces, and therefore they can kind of experiment with the model of what to be in a community means. How can we, envision a different sort of justice or society, etc., etc. So how do we address that in terms of gaming? If we just kind of, switch, sorry, might be nice to look at it in detail. Yeah. Never mind. If we switch actually sculpture for games, and if we are actually, if we address the question of what is the other of gaming, how do and what are the axes of gaming and the opposites of those principal qualities that game possess? I thought about fun, and I thought about the metaphoric level or the metaphoric structure of gaming. I still think that the regular mainstream approach to game is they're fun. They produce fun, they do fun, Candy Crush, etc. And the other way around to think about them is that they willingly or unwillingly they construe metaphors of this world. Usually they do it very subconsciously or even involuntarily. For instance, if you consider games like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing, these are very condensed metaphors of neoliberal politics, or let's say the world we live in. But the games are not even remotely addressing the fact. So these would be like subconscious metaphors. On the other hand of the spectrum, we would have therefore no fun and actual explicit work with metaphors. In this, let's say the left side is affective logic of gaming, the right side, or at least from my view, is like the operative logic of gaming, and the opposite would be, of course, the question. We can substitute it for critique, which is actually our position, at least today. It is a necessary position. It is a position somehow associated with art, with academia, with self-reflection of the gaming experience, etc. But it has some shortcomings. So we may even talk not only about critique as this kind of no fun and metaphor-oriented antipode and extension of gaming. Maybe art itself is this kind of the other of gaming. And maybe even politics is the other of gaming in terms of representing this kind of no fun, at least, supposedly no fun and metaphorical representative antipode of gaming, since democratic politics is all about representation and about the seriousness of the matter discussed. What we live today is actually this kind of entanglement, dialectic, tension in between this pole of gaming and politics. And Alfie already kind of introduced it as this kind of progressive, gamification of our political lives. So what do? Either I started with asking the questions what games are and what is, the extended field of gaming. What can be the other? What can be the desire of an actual gaming, of an, let's say, progressive, left-oriented, or like more reoriented gaming? Maybe we can just switch the question, and maybe we can ask, what is the other of politics? And of course, to big extent, it can be gaming. Gaming as the subconscious of politics, gaming as the desire revolution, gaming as not only the space of, let's say, inclusive and progressive cultures and identity politics, but gaming as an artistic practice of deterritorialization of all those problems we have with politics. So with that, maybe I can conclude, although there were some more nice and beautiful images that we did collectively with the FRAC collective. Maybe I can still do a tiny bit of a advertisement, because we will launch these images and the zine I've been kind of using subconsciously today at an exhibition. So next week on Thursday we have an opening in Pop-up Gavu gallery, and it's still will kind of revolve around these problems. It will definitely address the problem of labor, entertainment, and regeneration. How do we divide these activities that tend to be so intermingled today? So let me end with this hope for this progressive gameplay again. Thank you. And we're ready for the discussion. I know it has been long, it has been maybe exhausting, but I still hope there are questions. Like even among panelists.
Is this on? No.
Should be.
I don't know if I need it, I'm quite loud. Yeah, I really enjoyed all of those. I was taking a lot of notes of really interesting stuff. I wanted to ask, I don't really know who this is to, but it came up a few times, even from the first talk, about whether it's possible to speak about like intentionality, and then as you were just saying now, it's not possible to sort of think of games as it's often involuntary or unconscious or whatever what they do. And then the other kind of word that seemed really useful to me to kind of conceptualize all this was the question of a symptom, like seeing games as a symptom, or else what is about, I suppose, this, I think, and it's the gist of what lots of people are saying, that it's not adequate to see games as just a symptom insofar as like, well, they are a reflection of things that are already going on in culture or whatever, they're just a symptom of the way things are. I think clearly we're all in agreement that they do much more than that games are not simply a symptom of things, but a kind of driving force that actually affects the future and conditions us and transforms us in various different ways, and everyone had different ways of conceptualizing that. But I guess my question would be like, if we're all saying, we don't want to think of games as symptom, like, what is the alternative? Like, what do we want to call them? If they're not a symptom of X, Y, Z, what is an alternative way of like thinking about what games are that isn't that? So, and I don't know who that question's to, but I think it's really just an open question. Like, I think that part we haven't quite worked out. Like, we know what they're not, but we don't quite know what they are. And that goes to the art question, I guess.
Like very, very shortly. There is one even traditional answer to that, I guess, and that is world building. And that entangles gaming and politics even more. Like when I actually started to be more and more theoretically interested in gaming, it was for the reason that I consider it even far easier than in art to actually create something, this kind of site construction that even Rosalind Krauss is talking about. I think games are like straightforwardly oriented to this world building, which is which somehow returns with some renewed interest in terms of today. We are living at the end times. We live through this dystopian realism. We live through this like world ending, and the sheer activity of world building within, let's say, Unity engine may be really, really what we need.
Well, maybe I would just like to kind of comment on that with this notion of symptom. If we say symptom, we usually assume that there's a pathology, but if we follow Zizek, we can enjoy our symptom. And I think this kind of speaks to what Philip talked about with xenogaming. If we consider the xeno kind of the discovery, a type of uncanny experience of seeing automation, hidden up until then hidden processes which are suddenly exposed for being in a way automated, I could see gaming being very able to do this, even in its fundamentally algorithmic logic, that it can actually expose, it can kind of de-automate us and make us more conscious of our actually lived reality. I don't know if they actually do that. We might just be, gaming for fun, but I think the potential's there, and I'm sure we could come up with some examples.
Just a very brief note, that games always had a function in a culture. It didn't change, actually. So you just invest some emotions, but what you do is actually train yourself in a strategy which is important for the culture you are living in. And I think it's the same thing with the digital world as it always has been, just being.
No, I mean, I was going to say something very much like what you just said, actually. That's the history of play, actually, rather than video games. There's always been this function. And for me, I suppose the way I would want to conceptualize this is that, and I don't think there is games just for fun. I was amazed that you used Candy Crush as an example of fun, but because that's definitely work. But no, I think the way I conceptualize this, I don't know if this is right, but I think what games do is they don't give you what you want, they allow you to desire what someone else wants. So, and this goes to children's play, and when kids play in the playground and pre-digital play, what is one of the great pleasures of play is not that you do what you want, but that you do what someone else wants, and so you get to desire. So instead of saying games give us what you want, give us what we want, it's they give us the opportunity to want. So when you shoot someone in the head with a sniper rifle, this is not because deep down you want to shoot someone in the head with a sniper rifle and that desire is repressed. No, but it's possible to suspend your own desires and enter into a different structure where you do want to do that because you're the American soldier or whatever. Likewise, on a dating simulator or whatever, you get to desire because it's possible to take on the desire of the other in that context. So this is what I think games do, and that really, for me, that answers the question of games just for fun or whatever. It doesn't matter. Mario jumping on someone's head, you get to want to jump on someone's head, and this is why games are so appealing, because we are lacking desire as a culture, as a society, and games allow us to sort of jump into this kind of simulated world where desire is possible. I don't know, that's not really an answer, but I think it explains this relationship it explains the power of games in the way that we've all been talking about, in my opinion.
I would also say there is this kind of this possibility for some kind of alienation, when you have the interface which is responsive and everything, the games can be unresponsive and really make you feel the world very differently. And second one, I think the power of the fiction itself is quite important. The games like Disco Elysium, for example, it's really a strong critique of neoliberalism and. Yeah, it's really interesting, and it makes some kind of it pushes the media forward. So that would be my comment.
I just had a thought about like you know many times it was stated that we can learn stuff about ourselves through the games. Totally agree with that. Like even with the AI, we are actually learning how we function. On top of that, maybe you kind of destroy this with the desire here, but if games are partially as a mirror for us to learn what we want, how do we behave, what are the things we do. It seems very funny that it totally failed with this really lovable game called Spore. That game was actually intended as educational, and it had like quite a lot of parameters, in my opinion, which would actually make it work. But if it was so explicit that it's educational, maybe that was the problem. But do we still kind of think of games as something to discover stuff about society and you know, ourselves? Then isn't this actually the approach we should be fine-tuning, because it didn't work yet?
I mean, like, just quickly, I think, you know, games are educational whether we like it or not. And again, like we're saying about other things, you know, the fact for me is that the younger generation, or the generation behind me, or my daughter's 6, you know, this generation, their main understanding of history, just you could take an example like the medieval period or the Victorian period, 19th century. The main way in which young people consume images of history, for example, is through games. So these are educational whether you like it or not, whether they're realistic or not. So yeah, I think games are teaching people, you know, how to see the world, whether they mean to or not, or whether they want to or not. They're the primary set of images that a whole generation will interpret the world through. But like you said, they don't admit that. And as soon as you say this is an educational game, the gamers switch off.
Well, maybe one of the, sort of to jump in on the Spore, perhaps Minecraft does what Spore wanted to do. And in a way, obviously, you know, considering history through games or learning history through games, it's one thing. But if Minecraft has one specific particular feature and one particular affordance, is that everything is actionable. And this thing is really where it's at for it. Like every block is mineable and craftable. And the things that, especially the young generation, do with it are quite fascinating. Of course, you know, running Windows 95, programming a you know, workable Tetris game, and so on. This is actually like a sandbox to learn to, you know, like world, to, you know, as a verb, to work on the world and to, you know, develop worlds. And I find that fascinating, just how you know, it's essentially a learning game, but the young kids are just enthralled in it.
Andrzej?
Yeah, I guess it's pretty useful to kind of delve into the Minecraft example, because, yeah, sure, the blocks are, the core of the blockchain is really interesting, but I tried booting it up after like 10 years. I haven't seen it. And like the first thing you do when you download Minecraft from, say, Xbox Game Pass or whatever, you're bombarded with advertisements for premium servers, you're bombarded with like, buy clothing for real money, style, social pressure that is there. And so, you know, that's probably the dissonance we are faced right now. Like, Roblox is probably super interesting in terms of opening up space for people to experiment in game space, but at the same time, it's a goddamn company that is exploiting child labor and reeks with pedophiles and stuff like that. And its business model is atrocious. So, my open-ended question as well, because as Alfie kind of set the discourse, I now can not ask definitely, is that how do you deal with your thinking in games with this inherent dissonance to games that have some transformative potential in the current market, but the current market and business models that weren't there really 5 years ago or 10 years ago, like freemium and free-to-play and stuff like that, are really, I don't know, it seems to me that they might as well undermine the good that there is in the games, like Minecraft, for example. because one can only imagine the social pressure that is there in the loot box economy.
Well, it might be just a very quick comment, but of course Microsoft bought it, what was it, like 4 years ago? And I don't know if it's, this change has dated to that point, but it might be definitely something to inquire into.
Well, I think when you brought the Minecraft thing, I think what's really interesting about it is to see how the guy who actually made it end up. I don't know if you know it, but he's now sitting on the pile of money where he can do anything, like in Minecraft, at least what he's saying. And he's apparently very sad and depressed in some villa in Los Angeles. And I think it shows a bit about the way how this game works, that it doesn't give you a goal what to do, it gives you the sandbox, you can do everything you want, and then when you kind of win it, you maybe become really sad because you don't have the goal in the first place. So at least like my response to this question is that maybe doing games which are not so, let's say, addictive, or they have expiration in themselves, which is a good thing, because then you stop playing and you can do some other stuff, which is probably maybe not playing. And maybe the good example nowadays is the game Wordle, which maybe you know a bit, where actually the play is very simple. You can't remove anything, because you can just play it once a day for like 5 minutes, and you either lose or win, and there is nothing more in it. So yeah, that's just a comment on comment. I don't know.
I think this Wordle, this function of Wordle to not be addictive, like it's inbuilt that it can't be addictive. Is that the point?
Yeah, I was maybe thinking that the way how the guy the Marcus person, I think, is the creator of Minecraft, is sort of like a metaphor of what ends up when you try to invent a world which is like too open, let's say, and that in the end, if you don't give any goal or some sort of restrictions, maybe it's too broad, and you end up being sad of having too much possibilities.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough, yeah.
Everybody's looking forward for lunch, or is there any other comments and questions?
Or if anybody, like, I don't know, Alfie was nodding head, so if anybody wants to comment on my question about dissonance, really, I would appreciate that, but it's fine if not.
No, you'll have to say again what you want me to comment on. Say again what you want the comment on.
Yeah, that the subversive, or I guess like transformative potential of games seems to be really buried under, I don't know, current business model, really.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I know, but I think this is, the question of business models is really important. And then the concern with indie gaming and so on is often there are just more and more stories all the time of how sort of bad working conditions are in some of these like lean indie games companies and so on. So clearly what you've got is this weird situation where some of the most subversive stuff is coming from some quite problematic business models. But I can't help us to solve that problem, I'm afraid.
You mentioned earlier on the possibility that there needs to be some other stories told necessarily, and I was wondering, maybe this is a way to sort of frame this question that you were just asking as well, because you're walking this sort of delicate balance between affirming the radical potential or subversive potential of some of these platforms, some of these games, whereas at the same time sort of trying to unmask the hidden and buried supply chains and bad business practices within these very systems. And so is there maybe, rather than this classic problem of the left in treating certain things untouchable that have been exploited by capitalist intent, is there some other story that needs to be told about these sorts of supply chains, these sorts of platforms that allow us to work within the system and exploit it for the left's potential rather than the right's, rather than just treating it as untouchable? Is there like a balance between that, and is there some other thing that can be talked about, that can be said, that can be done to sort of frame the action of the left within these systems, within these platforms, as something other than just capitulating or being subsumed by capital?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, how as soon as you start, because when you started saying that, I was thinking, well, yeah, I mean, was one of the interesting things about Unite, the kind of game workers union, and like organizations which try to find other ways of organizing the left across a series of, because you'd even want people within AAA gaming, and yes, of course, there's no ethical consumption of a AAA game or indeed anything else, but you still would want in organizations which kind of tried to unite the left across this kind of spectrum of stuff. But then there was that, Game Workers Unite movement, which then also capitulated into some weird cancel culture madness and disappeared or lost some of its power and stuff. And then you start getting that then just became yet another one of these badly managed industries through which the games industry seems to be so sort of notorious for. So, it's definitely, the challenge is going to have to be involve that. And I think, I think even historically, what sometimes is called game theory, which I guess one could say is what we've been doing, although that usually refers to like that kind of weird Scandinavian lot. There's very little connection between them and actual practitioners, whereas I think at least this stuff which is like crossing the boundaries between digital arts, game practice, and theory, at least begins the work of producing a kind of left gaming world. But definitely, I don't, again, have the solution, but I would really like to see some kind of international organization of people within this industry kind of come together to try to answer some of those questions and think collectively about how to approach those things that you've just raised. I think that is something that's really needed.
Like your own metaversum or something like that? Didn't you think about that?
Can I have a footnote? I'm sorry, but I find it really interesting. I was just thinking, because like you said, there's no ethical AAA gaming or something like that, right? If I heard correctly. I'm watching this YouTuber, Jim Sterling show, and one of the things that have been going on with AAA gaming, at least in terms of Activision Blizzard and other horrible companies, is that their working conditions and stuff like that is super horrible. I'm just maybe it's not a good hypothesis, but in other areas of consumption, like say clothing or food or something, choosing the more ethical, say, consumption option it mostly comes at a cost, or it's undoable when it comes to computers or stuff like that. But in games, actually the more ethical selection is cheaper, kind of. So is there any, I don't know, maybe isn't there some sort of potential in ethical consumption of games?
And can I also just add to that? But I think it's more fun. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but there's nothing more boring to me than Grand Theft Auto 6 or the idea of that, or another Assassin's Creed game. Whereas if you look at some of the games which are built on much lower technology, much worse graphics, often open source and other kinds of, it's much more fun. People are bored of those AAA games. I actually think that the corner's turning on that. And it's not. We're not saying it. So it doesn't. So when you say it's going to be ethical, you could ethically choose to play indie games, but you could also just choose to do that because we've had enough of those boring games that, you know, so I think that is coming maybe, and it's an interesting point you make about how that is the reverse of what you'd find in the clothing industry, where obviously Primark, your cheapest clothes but your worst ethics, you know, it's interesting how that's happened.
Just another footnote on that footnote, there's an interesting example of this, also in relation to this lower tech aesthetic, of a Doom game that was released, in which you're essentially taking down neoliberalism, and in the end you are supposed to kill Margaret Thatcher as the final boss.
That sounds great. That's tonight's sorted.
Maybe a quick comment on how actually the tools are being more available in terms of game creations. I think the really good example is Unity versus Unreal, where Unity used to be a paid service, and I think only because their new politics, when the creators are charged like 5% from the game and then it's completely free, it's something which is great, and it's starting to happen in the 3D modeling software with the Blender when they're really pushing on Autodesk in making their products, let's say, more approachable to the public. So I think this is happening, and it's yeah, that's one possible answer, I think, for those things.
Maybe that's the answer we needed or we were looking for. And we can semi-conclude with at least the first panel. And I think we will reconvene at 2:30 with Peggy Schöneberger. Oh, sorry?
Thanks for all the questions.
Yeah, so let's meet like in almost an hour, and we'll have another round of gaming and art.
It is going to be a panel about gaming, art, and gallery spaces, so if you're more into fine arts, please stay or bring your friends.
raz, dva, tři, 1, 2. Ahoj Vicky, slyšíš nás? Čau. Neslyšíš nás. Neslyší mikrofony, jak to, že slyší hudbu, ale neslyší mikrofony? Nejsou, tenhle je v pohodě. Tady? Jedna, dva, tři, čtyři, 5, jde to tam, 1, 2, 1, 2. To je něco tam ze Zoomu, tam najít něco musí být, nebo to NDI. Slyšíš? Jo, tak to je super. A akorát se zpožděním a od obrazu se zpožděním, to slyšíš? Haló, Vicky?
Já se můžu...
Tak to je super.
Já se tady můžu zapnout na Zoomu, slyšíte mě na Zoomu?
Ale ještě nám ale nejde, že do repráku to, co říká Vicky.
Takže zase ještě mluvím na Zoomu, něco mluvím, jde to do repráku, nejde to do repráku, co?
No a my potřebujeme ještě tebe sem dostat do repráku. A ty mě teda slyšíš, jo?
Vás neslyším, moment, promiň, já se jenom podívám ještě na nějakou blbost, jestli tady něco nekoukám blbost. Vy jste, jo, už to vidím, prosím tě, vy jste mutlí, aula AVU je mutlá. Ask to unmute.
No, ale jasně, ale my nepotřebujeme asi mluvit teďkon jako do toho mikrofonu v kompu.
Jo, jasně, ono to
slyšel...
vlastně jakoby má posílat to systém audio, no. Na tom NDI vpravo dole na té ikonce, tam má být vlastně jakoby kliknutý na send systém audio vlastně, no.
Audio source, no, systém audio, to tam máme. Takže ono se to bude muset podle mýho jako fakt zrestartovat.
No, hele, a vím, že ono se to zasekávalo, to znamená, že když přepnete ze systém audio a pak zase zpátky, tak se to odseklo. To si pamatuju z minula.
Jakože když vypneme to NDI celý a pak ho zapneme znova, nebo co? Nebo já nevím, nemám volat Františka, ať to celý přenastaví ten projekt.
Že... jestli když se to odsekne, když vlastně změníte systém audio, změníte na něco jiného a pak to dáte zpátky.
Jo, ale to já jsem zkoušela, zkus to ještě teda tady dole. No, jasně, dej tam silence třeba, nebo něco, mikrofon, zkus ten mikrofon.
No.
No a teď jako znovu. Jo, já mluvím, stále mluvím, teď to zapnul a...
Ne, tak do počítače mi nic neleze.
Nelezu.
A vy mě tam slyšíte?
No ne, my tě slyšíme z počítače, my tě neslyšíme z repráku.
Že mě slyšíte na počítači?
No.
Halo, tak jo, tak já jakoby mluvím, že jo? Mluvím. Já si ještě zkontroluji radši mikrofon, ale vlastně jakoby stále mluvím, něco říkám. Nejsem úplně nahlas. No, takže... A teď už se vám začínám slyšet.
V repráku slyším.
Tak jo, to je dobrý.
Akorát potřebujeme teda ty, aby si slyšel mě, ale ty mě slyšíš už, tak už by to mělo být v cajku, ne?
Neslyším.
Slyšíš, Vicky, slyšíš mě, když jsem teď takhle úplně mimo od toho notebooku?
Že to není třeba mým kompem. Takže já se ještě rychle otevřu ten Zoom link.
A teď tam mluví nebo ne?
Na počítači. Můžu to zkusit i někdo třeba klidně ještě další.
No ne, jako neběží to, akorát, že tam dá to, My jsme Vickyho slyšeli tady, ale on nás furt neslyší. Ne, to není o teď o latenci, ale je to o tom, že jako v pohodě. Jo, takhle, no, tak to nevím. To tam může být zase ještě echo, jako zase zpátky, to, co bude mít puštěný na kompu, tak bude, a to ne, no. Ale ještě teda poslední tady ta věc a jinak pak asi bych zavolal Františka, jak postaví nový projekt s těma výstupama.
No. Jestli to máš sebou. Ano. Vlastně jasně, šel bys... Já to nevím, ale ví to František. Jo. A vlastně máš pravdu, že ideálně, kdyby se to udělalo takhle, jo? Že vlastně jakoby ten speaker... Ale to už ale dobře, tak mi jenom řekni, mám ho tam teď teda poslat, nebo mi mám zavolat a zeptat se ho. Klidně je v pohodě, když si budeš třeba na oběd a necháš ho tam.